today.
That's good. I mean, the people that listened to it did enjoy it. They thought you were an entertaining guy. So, the people did enjoy it.
But say 6 hours for, a guitar player who's most of his career has been in 4-point type is kind of excessive.
It is expecting a lot of people, but the people that do like you, I'm sure, would love something like that. So, Ted seemed to be really excited about it. So,
okay, so that's two of us. I can't even.
So my girlfriend is going to be getting home from work a little bit after 2:00 anyway, so that we'll have like maybe 2.5 hours window of time.
Okay, so I'm going to try to be more efficient.
Yeah, what's the goal? Do you want to try to do it again and see if we can cover your entire career?
Yeah.
Okay.
Or at least like up through Jamaica or something. I don't know. Let's see.
I feel like when you get to Jamaica, that's kind of the really exciting stuff. So
yeah,
I would love to get into
my childhood is exciting to me, but not anybody else probably.
No, that was good stuff too. But as far as what happened politically, and
yeah,
stuff when you were living in Jamaica,
right?
It's kind of like the meat of the story. I feel like.
Yes, it is. And we didn't even get. It was like an Italian dinner. You have 15 kinds of antipasto, and then the pasta comes out, and then the 25 main dishes, and then
it was. I mean, I learned a lot. I learned a lot about where I grew up too, Seymour, and that venue you were talking about that I had never known about.
Oh, the church, yeah.
My parents were actually, because my parents listened. My parents were saying it was actually in Shelton, not in Seymour. The place you were talking, I don't know if it was the church. It was the place.
No, the rubber plant. Yeah, the rubber plant was in Shelton.
Is that
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
But that whole area smelled like rubber, right? I mean, they probably remembered that.
Yeah, they were saying that. The Valley history.
Yeah.
I mean, and I'll just give you a heads up because I wrote out a couple of questions. I mean, the main stuff that I really wanted to ask you, I guess it kind of gets into once we start getting into the reggae stuff, but I really wanted to kind of pick your brain about reggae and reggae guitar and stuff like that, because I honestly don't know very much about it. And that seems to kind of be your area of expertise. So I feel like once we get into, when you started getting into reggae and whatnot, I have a bunch of questions that I can kind of just run through if you want.
Okay. So let's, yes, once we get there, yeah, okay. I think I know how I want to do this.
Okay. So you want to do it? I could just set it up again like we did last time and
yes.
just have you take us through your early life and then kind of just go from there?
Much quicker.
Okay, cool. All right. I'm not going to do an intro. I usually just I record an intro and put it in the front of the video. But
okay.
We're already recording, so we can just get started. All right, cool. All right, so for starters, could you take us through some of your early life, where you grew up, how you got introduced to music, and so on?
Yes. I grew up in a village called West Simsbury, Connecticut, which is a part of Simsbury, Connecticut. Now it's a suburb of Hartford. And when I was a kid, it was basically a farming community. And while I was there, it changed from a farming community to a suburb. But my earliest memories are of cow pastures and, green fields and walking to school and stuff like that. Very little, not quite Little House on the Prairie, but, a very simple time and place compared to what happened afterwards. And my parents were huge music fans. My mom played a little piano. My grandfather was a musician, an amateur musician. He played the piano and the banjo and a couple of other things. And my father was not musical at all, but both my parents thought music, in particular, in the arts in general, are very important. So they spent a lot of time listening to music, going to music. It was a huge part of their lives. So I grew up surrounded by it. And what I heard was pretty interesting. I heard traditional New England music, which would go back to the Revolutionary War, really, fiddling and square dance calling and, accordions and things like that. You would occasionally hear that, live musicians playing that. I remember, I have a very strong memory of a fiddler and a square dance caller playing at the shopping center one Saturday and being fascinated by this, like live music. And and my parents listened to what would be called middle of the road, what was called middle of the road music, which is basically accurately played representations of tunes that were popular without a lot of improvising. And, it was a radio format. And they listened to that. And my mom liked classical music, so that was on pretty much all day. And then on weekends, my dad loved jazz, so he would get up and make breakfast for the family so mom could sleep in. And he would put his early jazz 78s on the record player. We had one of those old record players. It was like a big piece of furniture with tubes in it. And it was really warm because of the tubes. So in the winter, you'd go huddle by the record player because it was warmer than any other place in the house. And so I think I really fell in love with jazz because it was dad's music. Mom liked it too, but I was very in awe of my father. And when you heard jazz on an early Saturday morning, it meant several good things. It meant dad was home. It meant there was no school, and it meant you were getting bacon and eggs and things like that for breakfast instead of cereal. So
nice.
I have all these positive associations with early jazz. So my earliest musical memories are of actually banging along with these records with my Lincoln Logs. This is a construction toy that people used to have. I don't know if they make them anymore, but you could make these little log cabins and things, and they were about the size of drumsticks for small hands, so I would bang them on the floor. And decades later, when I started playing with Winston Grennan, who was one of the great early reggae drummers, a lot of the rhythms he played were things I was trying to play with my Lincoln Logs. And I'm not sure what the connection with that is, except that New Orleans jazz had a big effect on Jamaica because New Orleans music is very popular there. So I think maybe we were both referencing New Orleans in some kind of way. And New Orleans is really an African sort of diaspora hotspot in America. A lot of rhythms came to there. It was really the capital of the Caribbean in a way, the way Miami is now. And so that was the earliest exposure to music. We had a piano, which my mom didn't play. She put in the basement for reasons I don't fully understand. And I was really interested in it, but I asked about lessons and she said, no piano lessons. And so the idea of actually playing music didn't occur to me. It was just something, it was just in the air. My parents had music on pretty much, if they were awake, there was music on. So it was like the birds, and that was a really nice way to grow up. And in fourth grade, my mother decided I was going to play the violin. I was kind of clumsy, and she thought the bowing would be good for my large motor skills. I guess it was an early kind of OT. And I had no interest in the violin whatsoever, but what I really wanted to play was the trombone, because that was my favorite instrument in all the New Orleans music. And we had Young People's Guide to the Orchestra and my mom took us to see the symphony and so on. So
What was it about the trombone that you liked so much?
the sliding, bending the notes, and the way I play now is a lot of bent notes, and I'm sure some of it goes back to the trombone, and I like to try to play vocally, and the trombone always seemed like the real rebel wild card in the Dixieland band, just the guy who would just cut through everything with a smear,
Right.
And I love the clarinet too, and the trumpet, and everything. But the trombone was the one that really spoke to me. And my next door neighbor played the trombone, and he was a year older. So I heard him playing the trombone, and I said to my mom, "I want to play the trombone. That's it. That's what I want to do." And she said, "You can't play trombone because you need braces." And I said, "What are braces?" And, I had real buck teeth when I was a kid, so I got braces, and that was it for the trombone. So I started playing the violin, and I had the world's worst violin teacher, who shall remain nameless, but I didn't mind the violin. But it was kind of like homework. Half an hour of violin every day. Do your homework, get it done, and I like the feeling of the strings under my hands, and I like the idea of controlling and producing sound. And I like the idea of, the vibrating body and everything. And I liked a lot of things about it, but it felt wrong. First thing was it was kind of high. It was like squeaky. So what I was hearing was lower, like where the trombone is. But anyway, I stuck with the violin and basically treaded water for a couple of years. And then my mom realized I wasn't making any progress, and she found me a private teacher whose name was Mr. Palmer. And he's really the reason I became a musician, I think. He was a brilliant teacher, and he was interested in a lot of advanced things. He was interested in world music. He was interested in avant-garde classical composition. He was interested in electronic music. And he not only made me a decent violin player and later a viola player, but he also taught me how all the instruments are put together and make sounds. And he taught me that there are other musical traditions that had different scales. He had a sitar, for example, and what he did on his vacations was go to other countries and buy indigenous instruments and bring them back and figure out how they worked. So he was just a really inspiring guy. He was very polite and quiet and well-mannered and everything, but he had a way of figuring out what made a kid tick, and and developing that. And one of the things Mr. Palmer did that was very unusual, I think it's still unusual, particularly for a classical teacher, is that he insisted that all his students try to write their own music. So after I'd been studying with him about a year, he said, "Andy, I want you to go home and write a piece." And I said, "Okay." And I went home and wrote something and came back. My mom helped me write it down. And I played it for him, and he checked my work, and I hadn't written it correctly. There was a bar of 5 in it or something. And he showed me how to write it correctly, and I played it for him. He looked at me and said, "That's very interesting, write something else." So he later told my mom a couple of things. First of all, that I was the worst student he had who didn't quit. And second of all, that he was very impressed by the compositions because they didn't sound like I was copying anybody.
Was this middle school or high school?
Middle school. This would be 7th, 8th grade. I think I started with him in 7th grade. Yeah, 7th grade. And by 8th grade, he was having me write these things. And he actually had me write a quartet that we played at a recital. I mean, he really took it pretty far. And then he sent me to a viola teacher named Mr. Missel, who had been in every symphony orchestra in the country practically, and was a world-class orchestra player, and also had a side business writing compositions for various things. He had a way of getting commissions. He was a good hustler in the classical music sense. And the idea of hustling was foreign to me. But Mr. Missel was great at it. And I studied with him up through college. And then after a couple of years of college, I decided I wasn't going to be a viola player, and that was that. Mr. Palmer made me switch to the viola because A, there was less competition, and B, I have longer arms. And it was, as soon as I switched to the viola, I thought, this is a lot more like it. This isn't squeaky like the violin. I like this. It still isn't right, but it's better. So,
Right.
so somewhere along the line, I had a babysitter with a guitar, and I asked her if I could try it out. And guitar was very fashionable then. There were folk singers, Peter, Paul, and Mary, and that kind of stuff. And there was a kid in school named Katie Batesole who did 500 miles with her guitar in front of the auditorium, and she had a beautiful voice, and she was full of confidence. And I thought, wow, look at that. She's like a year older than me, and there she is up there in front of the entire school entertaining everybody, and she sounds great, and the guitar sounds great. Wow. So that was kind of a seed about the guitar. And of course it was very popular in the 60s, the Beatles and everything. And when I was 10, I got a transistor radio for Christmas, and then I started being able to control my own playlist and listening to top 40 radio, which was very polyglot then. You'd hear Bob Dylan, then you'd hear Motown, and then you'd hear Slim Harpo, and then you'd hear Wilson Pickett, and then you'd hear Herman's Hermits. It was all over the place. And growing up in a little place in Connecticut, just the sound of the voices was really intriguing. You could tell they weren't from around here. And, I didn't know if they were black or white. I didn't know. The English ones you could tell because of the accents, but really I didn't find out anything until I saw the album covers later,
Right.
And so I became a religious top 40 fanatic and was thinking about the guitar. And then my mom took a job at a music store to help pay for prep school. They sent me to prep school for 3 years. And the guitar teacher at the music store was from Texas, a guy named Bert Teague. And he said, Mrs. Bassford, your son's interested in the guitar. He should really see this guy, B.B. King. He's the world's greatest blues singer. So there was a special on educational TV, and my parents were pretty anti-TV, but PBS was okay. That was educational. So I watched B.B. King, and he was doing I've Got a Mind to Give Up Living. And that was it. I just fell in love with the idea of the guitar and electric guitar and playing the blues and singing like B.B. King. And this became the secret fantasy that I was going to be a guitar player and sing and play the blues. And the fact that I didn't actually know any black people or know how to play a guitar or even own a guitar, these were obstacles that I would figure out later, but
Right.
the dream was inspired. So eventually I got a guitar from a next door neighbor who was splitting up with his wife, and it was a one pickup harmony, and it had a dent in the 7th fret. Yes, 7th fret. So every time you played A on the D string, you'd get a B flat. So I learned to shift positions early. And because I could already play the violin, the guitar, I was surprised that I could figure it out, because the guitar was cool and I wasn't particularly cool, but this felt like the right thing. Once I got a hold of a guitar and a pick, and an amplifier, the whole thing started to make sense. And I played bass first because a friend of mine had a band that needed a bass player, but I really practiced the guitar more than the bass. And for a while I played both of them, and then I just decided I was going to be a guitar player. And so I started doing, the garage band thing. And then my junior year in prep school, I got into a local rock band that actually had gigs, and that was where we played in the valley, your home area there. And my first gig was at a church supper. We got a mixer. We got $40, split 5 ways, $8. All the money in the world to a kid living at home. $8 is a lot of money then. Albums were $3.99 for stereo and $2.99 for mono, and the mono mix was the radio mix, so they were usually better. So you could buy a couple of albums and like a pack of guitar strings with a gig. So by this time I was fully into playing the guitar and learning about blues, which was not easy because there wasn't access to it where I lived. But I found a couple of records, and then at my prep school, they had an electronic music studio, which involved primitive synthesizers and tape recorders. And I wangled my way into getting a key to the studio so I spent all my free time the last 2 years of school in the studio learning how to splice tape and record things and overdub. So by the time I was out of high school, I was still playing viola in the orchestra too. So by the time I got out of high school, I was playing classical music in the orchestra. I was playing electric guitar. I knew how synthesizers worked. I knew how to overdub. I knew how tape worked. I could play some things by ear. I was doing some gigs. I was pretty far into it. And when I went to college, that just continued. I went to Trinity in Hartford and started playing, found some guys to play with right away. And then eventually we started playing parties at UConn. And we had, I was making real money by sophomore year. I was buying my books and stuff out of music. And we had a long residency in a biker bar in Stafford Springs, which was pretty terrifying. It was a sort of neo-Nazi motorcycle gang hangout. So I learned how to deal with people who are much tougher than I was and not get intimidated and get along with them,
What kind of music? What kind of music does a crowd like that like?
We played a lot of Allman Brothers. We jammed a lot. We were sort of an early jam band. We played very loud, and we played things like Moondance for 15 minutes, and then we would segue into something else. And I've got a gig tape, and one of the things on it is The Stumble, the Freddie King song. Yep. We're playing it probably twice as fast as the record. It sounds like it sounds like Freddie King being played by a bunch of punks, And what else did we play? We played some Doobie Brothers songs because you had to, but mostly it was anything that we could make into long guitar wanking. The other guitar player was very good, and we used to trade solos, and bikers liked us, and then there were ladies of the evening working upstairs in the massage parlor, and they liked us, and the bikers liked us. So we had this little place where we could experiment and do music that had nothing to do with anything as far as trying to get a record deal or anything beyond playing for, this rough clientele. So that lasted through college. But college was also where I got exposed to reggae. So I'm my freshman year, the Harder They Come came to Trinity as an independent film. They had a very good film society, and it showed up on a double bill with Cries and Whispers. And I went to see all the movies at college because Simsbury didn't have a movie theater. So I just, whatever it was, I went. And the movie came on, and it opens with Jimmy Cliff coming in from the country to Kingston on a bus with all these people bringing food to market, a trip I would replicate in a mere 7 years. But little did I know. But anyway, it's a great movie if you haven't seen it. And if you want to know what Jamaica was like for me, basically that was, imagine like was kind of a refugee from a biker band in the corner looking scared, and that was kind of what it was like. A lot of the same people are in the movie that I used to play with. But anyway, I fell in love with the music, particularly Toots and the Maytals singing Sweet and Dandy. And I had this wonderful thing, like when I heard B.B. King and I heard Percy Sledge and I heard John Coltrane. Those are the four things that really changed how I thought about music from then on. Percy Sledge was when I was just listening to the radio and not thinking about playing. And I fell in love with, soul music and that kind of singing. And then B.B. King with that kind of singing with the guitar added to it. And then Toots, which was that kind of singing with all these different wonderful rhythms going on. And I got into Coltrane my freshman year also. I didn't understand it at first, and then I was listening to Live at the Village Vanguard, and I heard Elvin Jones play back something on the drums that Coltrane had just played, like a rhythm. And I said, oh, they're talking to each other. I get this. So, then I got interested in jazz too. And there were guys at college that were into jazz, and there were two other very good guitar players in my dorm. And we would get together and listen to music and stay up late and go to the donut shop and argue about stupid college kids, music stuff. And so I had a bunch.
So were you going to school for music?
No.
Oh, okay.
No, I wanted to go to Berkeley, and that was not happening.
Mm-hmm.
And it would have been interesting had I gone to Berkeley, because I would have been exposed to the Harder They Come there too, because it came to Boston around the same time. But my parents were not going to pay for it because they didn't see the value of it. And they didn't mind my going to a regular school with a good music department, which Trinity did not have. But what they did have was a relationship with the University of Hartford, which of course has the Hart Music School.
Right. And
the credits were good. If you took a Hart course, it was a good credit for Trinity. So I took theory there and history of jazz with Jackie McLean, and this was one of the first jazz programs in the country, really. Jackie was a real pioneer in bringing jazz into college, and his wife was a real visionary, and she started the Artist Collective, which is still going, a jazz-oriented sort of music school in, in the north end of Hartford, which is, the rough part. And the south end could be pretty rough too sometimes, but he was an early advocate of this, and we actually took his course twice so we could hear all the stories again. And somehow they credited us, took the same course twice, but he told different stories each time, so it was worth it. And he was a real influence because he was a guy who'd actually done it. He was friends with Charlie Parker. He played with Miles Davis, and then he was Jackie McLean. He was a living link to all this stuff that we were really getting into. We were all into bebop and Blue Note records and stuff. And I was into reggae, which my friends thought was odd. But
and the reggae, the initial interest in reggae came from seeing The Harder They Come, the movie?
Yes. And then I bought the soundtrack album, and I found out that I couldn't play this stuff. Which, as a budding, arrogant young guitar player, I found, I took that as a personal affront. And I said, I'm going to learn how to do this. So I worked on this stuff for quite a while, and I bought every reggae record I could get a hold of. And then I found that there were Jamaican record stores in Hartford, and the owner of one of them, a guy named Beltone, took a liking to me, and I used to spend all my free time at his store listening to records and having him talk to me about Jamaica and so on. And I would buy all these records with my gig money and bring them back to the room. And my friends would go, "What is that? You know, it sounds like nursery rhymes." But it made sense to me, so I got really into it. But there was nobody to play it with. You know, there were guys who wanted to play bebop. There were guys who wanted to play rock. You know, there were guys who wanted to play in top 40 bands and make money. There was nobody that wanted to play reggae. So here I was trying to figure this stuff out on my own. And then the last year of college, right before I graduated, I had no idea what I wanted to do except I wanted to be a musician. And the band that it was playing, the Biker Bar, just split up. So I had no band, I had no gigs, I had no prospects. I was going to have I went to college for philosophy, actually, and I graduated with honors in philosophy, which is remarkable considering how much time I spent playing scales. I used to write my papers at the typewriter the night before they were due. You know, it was Do
you have any favorite philosophers in college?
Yeah, Plato is probably the favorite. Marx. I would say there's value in most of them, but I would say those two guys in particular were the biggest influences on me. You know, Marx for the economic analysis and the class analysis, and Plato for the Socratic method and the rigor, learning how to conduct rigorous arguments and think clearly. And both of these things, strangely enough, came in handy later on. You know, nobody at Channel One cared that I had a philosophy degree, but it helped me figure certain things out. And there is value in a college education for a musician. And I think actually I might have, maybe my parents were right. I mean, I don't know. I would have gotten a lot out of Berkeley. There's a lot of technical things I wish I knew that I would have gotten there, but I did plenty of music at Trinity in an informal manner. And I think, you know, it worked out. I had a career anyway. So anyway, I went to Beltone's shop about a week before graduation. One of my friends from college, a guy named Rick Sigler, who I played in a band with, said, you know, I want to go see this place. I always hear you talking about him. I want to go there with you. So none of my friends that ever wanted to make the trip, you know. And so we went there, and Beltone got very excited when I walked in. And he said, you know, I have a show coming up with Marcia Griffiths at the West Indian Club, and I have a band, but they need a lead guitarist. Do you think you can do it? I was going to say no. And my friend Rick said, oh, of course he can do it. He plays that stuff in the dorm all the time. He's your man. He's the guy you want. So after that, I couldn't say no. So I went to meet the band. I borrowed my mom's car and drove to the rehearsal place and started, you know, an audition, and they liked me and I liked them. And they were not the greatest musicians, but they were the greatest people. I'm still in touch with some of them, you know.
This was a reggae
yeah,
group?
They were called the Mighty Venturians, and they were all of them Jamaicans. The sax player was Trinidadian, and it turned out years and years later, I found out that I'd gone to prep school with his daughter.
Oh, wow.
She was one of two black girls at Loomis Chaffee. And he was the only one that didn't like me. He was polite, but he didn't like me, and he wasn't giving up anything about anything other than music. So it took decades before I made the connection. And and we weren't great, but we played the songs people wanted to hear. And the band leader was a wonderful guy named Mr. Thomas, and he got us work at the West Indian Club and doing some other little shows on the West Indian circuit. So I just graduated from college, and now I had a job playing in a reggae band. I mean, the money was horrible. I made much better money playing frat parties, and because it was a much bigger group and we weren't making as much money to start with. But they were real Jamaicans. We were really playing reggae, and we weren't playing like Bob Marley stuff. We were playing the music that Jamaicans want to hear, which is different from the music that American record companies decided was marketable. Mm-hmm. And I started getting familiar with the culture and comfortable with the people. And, you know, I was playing reggae with the people, you know, for the Jamaican audience with Jamaicans. And I still kept in touch with my rock friends, you know, my jazz friends. And eventually, some of the guys who'd been in the biker band regrouped and got a female singer, and there was a lot of top 40 work. So basically, we did got a band together that did covers, and that paid enough to live on. So with much regret, I left the Venturians. But before I left them, Horace Andy came by, who's one of the iconic late 60s, early 70s singers. And he was living in Hartford at that time, and he was going to hire the band to play on a record, but the only person he liked was me. So he asked me to play on a record, and I'd never been in a studio before, but we went to New York and recorded 7 songs, and the album came out as In the Light, and it's been reissued twice. It's considered his best or second best album of his career. And he got very visible in the 90s with Massive Attack. He's part of that collective.
I've heard of that. What is that?
They're trip hop. They're kind of like DJs that started a band with musicians and singers and guest singers. And he's their favorite guest singer. So he's on all the records, and he's part of the live band. So he's actually done really, really well for himself, much better than most of the reggae artists. And he's a great guy. I couldn't say enough good things about Horace.
And this was the first album you played on?
Yeah, it's called In the Light. VP just put it out again a couple of years ago. And then it came out again in the 90s. They reissued it. And the dub album version is also very popular with collectors. And all of this was lost on me. I mean, I went to the studio, I played. It was kind of like getting hit by a truck. It went by so fast. And I went back one time to do overdubs on a couple of things. And Horace was going to start a band with me in it. And then that didn't work out. And then we kind of went our separate ways. He had some career things happening that he went to do. But after a few years, so this is like I made In the Light in 76. It came out in 77.
Well, actually, just real quick, before you move on from that, could you tell that story about what it was like trying to get paid for that album?
Yes.
Too good of a story.
Yeah, all right. I'll try to do the Cliff Notes version. But being a complete novice about the music business, I knew there were studio musicians. I thought they all lived in Hollywood and did soundtracks, or played, on big band records or something. And I knew you got paid for recording, but I didn't know how it worked. So when Horace asked me to play on the record, I said, well, how does the money work? And he said, well, we record the record and then we put it out, and then when it sells, we pay everybody. And that made sense to me, not knowing any better. And I said, okay. And we, the night of the session, we got done and we're driving back to Hartford, and the producer said, are you hungry? And I said, yeah. And he bought me a corned beef sandwich and a can of ginger ale. And I was like on cloud 9, because that was my thing in those days, corned beef sandwiches and ginger ale. Mm. And I got to play on a record, and I got fed. Like you couldn't touch me. I was the coolest guy in the world. But when the record came out, I thought, wait a minute, okay, now it's out. Now I should get paid. So I called Horace up and I said, well, and I'd seen the other guys on the session getting paid, but I didn't get paid. And I didn't know what the deal was. There was so much going on. I was just trying to play the music properly. I wasn't really concerned about the business end of it. But it struck me as odd that they were getting paid on the spot and I wasn't. But anyway, I called Horace up and I said, you know, the record's out. Aren't I supposed to get paid? And you said, you're absolutely right. We'll go down to New York and we'll see Everton, who was the producer. So I borrowed my mom's station wagon, you know, this red Ford thing with the rack on the top for, you know, bikes and stuff. And we drove down to Corona in Queens. And in those days, going from Hartford to New York was like going to Mars. You know, it was just something that you didn't do very often. I think I'd been there 4 or 5 times in my life, you know, to do the record a couple times and then to go buy a violin and then buy the viola. And then I think one time to go to the Bronx Zoo or something, you know. So it was not something that you did all the time if you were from Hartford in those days. So we drove down to Corona. I forget how, I guess we must have had a map. I forget how we got there. And so we pull up in front of this very seedy looking building, and it's a hot summer night, and there's all these kids running around the street, you know, being rowdy and throwing things and breaking bottles and stuff. And there's no parking, of course, and I've got the Connecticut plates on the station wagon. And I have no idea what's going on. And I go to Horace, you know, I don't know what to do. I don't want to park too far from the building because I don't have to walk, you know, through any more people than I have to. And he said, you can double park in front of the fire hydrant. We won't be long. You know, and I was very law abiding. You know, I grew up with cows. I'm not used to double parking. That seemed, you know, very, very reckless to me, but I couldn't think of a better alternative. So we did that. And it, you know, he buzzed the buzzer, and we actually, no, there wasn't a buzzer. The door was wide open. You know, it was one of those buildings. And we walked up to whatever floor it was, and there's piss and beer and stuff in the stairwell. And I'm going, oh Lord, what am I getting into? And we go up to this door, and Horace knocks on the door, and this little slit opens, and he says, you know, Amiman. And the door opens, and we go in. And in the room is, let's see, was it 2 dudes? Yeah, I think 2 dudes with automatic rifles. Everton, the producer, his girlfriend, and the only piece of furniture in the room is a mattress. And they're sitting on the mattress. And the back of the door has one of these braces like this that goes into the floor and you lock it. I think it was called a fox lock. They were all the rage in New York in the 70s because you couldn't kick the door down. You'd have to actually destroy the door to get in. And so I'm looking at this enormous beam going into the floor. And lining the room are these enormous, you know, rows and rows of shopping bags, all of which are filled with, you know, 10, 5, 10, and $20 bills. We're talking, you know, dozens of shopping bags filled with money. And on the other side of the room are shopping bags full of nickel and dime weed bags. So of course, now I'm seeing how the record is financed. I'm going, this is not quite how I guess a major label works.
Just plastic shopping bags?
What's that?
Just plastic shopping bags?
No, paper. This is the 70s. Brown paper bag. You know, okay. the big, like they're trying to get us to use again now.
Right.
The same kind of stuff my mom used to get her groceries in, you know, except they're filled with weed and money. And on the back of the door, you know, there's a little slit you can see through, and there's another little slit below the window. And while I'm there, you know, they lock the door back up, and I see money coming in. It's like a vending machine, you know, a $5 bill comes in through the slot, and then one of the guys with the guns pushes out a nickel bag or a dime bag or whatever.
It's like a vending machine.
You're like inside the drug vending machine. And this is going on constantly while the rest of the story takes place. And of course, my presence there is not what anybody is expecting. And the guys immediately trained their guns on me, and the dog starts growling, and the girl looked like she was going to growl. And Everton looks at Horace. He's not happy. And he said, you know, what the blood clot you bringing beer for, man? What? And they go into Jamaican, which I didn't speak then. But it's clear that it's not a happy conversation. And what was going on was Everton was furious that Horace had brought me to his place of business because I couldn't be trusted. And I think some of the discussion was whether I was going to live or not. And my mom's car is double parked in front of the fire hydrant with all these kids running around. You know,
I forgot about the station wagon.
Right? And in the 70s, stealing hubcaps was a big thing.
Oh.
So I'm thinking, you know, all the hubcaps are going to be gone by the time we get down here, if I get out of here alive. So they're arguing in patois for what seems like hours. It was probably 5 minutes, but it seemed like forever. And the guys have the guns trained on me. The dog is looking at me like he's ready to jump. And I'm going, my mother was right. I never should have been a musician. This was a horrible idea. Maybe it's not too late for law school. Because she actually got as far as convincing me to take the law boards, but I couldn't. I did okay, but I couldn't care less, you know. And, you know, but while these guys have their guns training me, I'm thinking about law school if I ever get out of here, you know. So finally the discussion, finally I started understanding that Horace is saying I need to get paid for the session. And once they've decided I'm not going to die, the question is who's going to pay me? And Horace's position was that Everton should pay me, and his position was that I was Horace's guy, and it was Horace's idea to have me on the record, so Horace should pay me. So anyway, Horace, I guess, I don't know what the convincing argument was, but finally Everton looks at me and he smacks the mattress, you know, and says, sit down. So I sit down on the edge of the mattress, and he takes one of the shopping bags and he starts counting out, you know, the 10s and the 20s. And he says, how many songs did you play? And I said 7. He said, I pay $30 a song, not anymore. Don't come back to me for anything else. And I said, okay. And he counts out $210 and he smacks it on the mattress. There's your money. Go away and don't come back. And being a polite New England child, you know, I stuck out my hand to shake his hand, and Jamaicans are not into handshaking anyway. And he just looked at me like he wanted to spit on it. So I said, thank you. And Horace said, we better leave now. And I said, that's a good idea. So anyway, I put the $210 in my pocket, and we got out of there as quickly as we could. Fortunately, the car was still there, as were the hubcaps. So we got out of there really quickly, and then we went to another drug building in the Bronx for some reason. And there was another dialogue I didn't understand, and I asked Horace about it when we got back in the car, and I said, what were you guys talking about? And he said, well, they wanted to kill you, but I told them you were a musician and that they shouldn't do that.
Because you saw their operation?
Well, yeah, I didn't see the other operation, but I'd seen this one. But but what's remarkable about this, when you actually know how things work in Jamaica, was it's almost unheard of for the artist to stand up to the producer and insist a musician get paid. That was really unusual. Normally, if in a situation like that, the singer would throw up his hands and say, well, I'm just the singer, I can't do anything. Horace thought enough of me to go down to New York and take me to this guy's place of business and argue with him with guns trained on us until I got paid.
Wow.
So this is the kind of person he is. So I was living in a commune at that point. That's another long story, but I got back to the commune after dropping Horace off, and I dropped the car off in the Aetna parking lot. You know, my dad worked at Aetna, so the deal was if I borrowed the car, I had to drop it off in the parking lot. So I dropped the car off in the parking lot, and I walked to the commune. And I opened the wallet and I counted the money, and there was $210. And I'd never held $210 in my life. You know, we used to play this club when I was in college. We played 4 nights a week, and I think I made $30 a night, something like that. And you know, that was what I used to buy books and stuff at school. So I'm looking at this money and going, I played on a record and I got paid for it. Wow. Wow, this is interesting. And I was playing in the cover band at that point, and I told the guys the story, and they're kind of, you know, shaking their heads like, I'm glad, you know, glad you're in one piece. Let's learn this Fleetwood Mac song, you know? And so there I was on the cover circuit with this sort of B- level band. You know, we worked a lot because there was so much work, and we played songs people wanted to hear, and the singer was cute. But we were not one of the top bands by any stretch of the imagination. And making a record was like something, it was like going to Mars. In those days, you went to the studio to cut demos to get club gigs. And some of the R&B bands would do things like press up 200 or 500 copies of 45 and sell them at the gigs. But the rock bands weren't doing that because the rock market was albums. And very few of these bands were popular enough to contemplate making a whole album. There was one called Little Village that actually did and sold 10,000 copies in Connecticut alone, but they were the kings of the heap then. That was a bit later on. But anyway, so there I was playing the cover circuit like all the other pretty good rock guitar players of the era. And except I'd made this weird record. And it was like getting abducted by aliens and brought back. You're trying to describe to people what the aliens look like, you know, and you know, I went to the planet and they were fine, you know, and I played on this record and here it is, and you know, and you know, as the Connecticut music scene is pretty conservative, and this was strange, you know. Mm-hmm. So so anyway, after a couple of years of doing the cover thing, I realized that although you could make a living in Hartford, you couldn't do anything other than that. So I started thinking about going to New York. And so the only person I knew in New York was a guy named Lister Hugh and Lowe at Island Records. And this is when Island was the reggae label. You know, Bob Marley was on it, Third World, everybody. Toots was on Island. You know, they were like, Island and Virgin were the two record labels that really committed to reggae at that point, CBS to some extent, but mostly it was Island and Virgin. And of course, I was still going to Beltone and buying records with my gig money, so I was up on all the newest things. And so anyway, I went down to, it's another funny story. The only person I knew in the music business in New York was Lister Hugh and Lowe. And I'd met him at a gig. Horace had done a show in Brooklyn, and he took me with him to meet everybody and watch what was going on. And I knew from my record company liner note reading that Lister worked at Island. So I thought, okay, I'll go to New York, I'll take the Greyhound, I'll bring my guitar, and I'll go to Island Records and I'll meet Lister and I'll become a reggae musician in New York. Like, how do I get more work playing on records like I did Within the Light? Because I figured, well, I played on one and got paid. I could get on more and get paid. So,
real quick, sorry, I'm going to use the bathroom real quick, but you could keep talking. I can hear you through my Bluetooth, so just keep talking. I'll be right back.
Okay. So this seemed like a foolproof plan, and I got on the Greyhound and I went down to New York, and I looked in the phone book and found where Island Records was and looked at the street map and walked over to Madison Avenue. It was in, I think, the Time Life building at that point. And, you know, big office building, and there I am in my black t-shirt and my chinos and my sneakers with my guitar case, and I go up in the elevator with all these office building types. And I walk into the office at Island Records. And I walk up to the receptionist and she says, you know, can I help you? And I said, well, I'm here to see Lister, Hugh and Lowe. And she says, do you have an appointment? And to show you how naive I was, I didn't realize that if you're going to an office building with a major record company in it, you need an appointment if you want to talk to anybody there. So this hadn't really occurred to me as an obstacle. But I said, well, you know, I really don't have an appointment, but I know Lister and I want to talk. I'd like to talk to him if I could. And I'm willing to wait. She says, well, you can't see him without an appointment. And so I thought, okay, I don't really know what to do here. But at some point, Lister is going to have to come out of the office. He'll go to lunch or he'll leave for the day. And I'm just going to sit in the waiting room until they throw me out or I see Lister. So I said, is it okay if I wait? You know, it's very hot out. Can I sit down here and cool off for a minute? And she said, yes, absolutely. You can do that, but you can't see Lister without an appointment. I said, well, I understand. So I'm sitting there for maybe 5 minutes and all of a sudden there's a huge commotion and the door flies open. And Max Romeo comes storming out, waving his hands. Rasclot, blood clot, bomber clot, Island Records, a fuckery to blood clot, bomber, rasclot. You know, every kind of Jamaican bad word. And smoke is coming out after him. And Lister is following him, you know, gesticulating, kind of waving his arms, trying to get him to calm down and come back. And Max slams through the glass doors and he goes out in the lobby and he's yelling and screaming and he's punching the elevator buttons, and then some people come off the elevator and he's yelling and they shrink away from him and he goes into the elevator and the doors close. You can still hear him yelling as the elevator goes down to the street.
Wait, who is Smoke?
Max Romeo.
Oh, that's his nickname?
No, he was one of the artists on Island at the time.
Oh, but didn't you said Smoke was following him?
Yes, I'll get to that. So, so Lister is kind of standing in the middle of the office, you know, and everybody is looking at the smoke coming out and recovering from all the yelling and screaming. And everybody's looking shocked. And behind Lister are Willie and Ibu from Third World, and they're laughing. And Lister looks around he looks around the office, you know, he's trying to get his bearings, I guess, to figure out what to do next. And he sees me there with my guitar and he goes, Andy, what are you doing here? I said, well, I came here to see you, but they said I need an appointment. He said, oh, don't worry about that. Come on back in. Nice. So he brings me into his office, which is filled with smoke. And on the papers, on the desk are some papers. And I can see the top of the papers left and it says royalty statement. Max didn't like his royalty statement, so he set it on fire. So I'm looking at Lister's desk and I'm going, he set your desk on fire? He said, yeah, Max didn't agree with Island's royalty statement, so he had a unique way of showing his displeasure. So, you know, here I am off the bus from Connecticut, and you know, I have a meeting with a major A&R guy at a major record company because one of the artists has set his royalty statement on fire. It's just, the whole thing is so crazy. And so he says, well, why did you want to see me? And I said, well, you know, I played on the record with Horace. He said, yes, it's a good record. It did well, and it had done well. It went to, I think, #1 on the Black Echoes chart, which was one of the big English reggae charts. But at that time, I didn't understand that England was the main market for reggae. So that didn't strike me as anything other than kind of interesting. I'm up on some chart that I've never seen. He said, yes, you know, it's a good record. I said, well, you know, I'm tired of Hartford. I want to come to New York and I want to do more session playing like I did on In the Light. And do you think I could get work for Bull Wacky or what was the guy's name in Brooklyn? Jah Life. You know, there are quite a few New York reggae producers then, Brad at Clock Tower. Uh, and I said, you know, this is what I want to do. I want to come to New York and play on reggae records. And he looked at me and he said, you know, Andy, I'll give you the numbers. I don't have any problem giving you the numbers of these guys. And you can tell them that I told you to call them. But I don't think they're going to give you any work. And I said, why not? I mean, yeah, that's how dumb I was, you know. And he said, well, you know, they have their own people they're used to using already, which hadn't occurred to me, you know. But of course, that's always true. Producers always have their set of guys that's hard to crack into if they don't know you. So, so he said, look, I'll give you the numbers. That's no problem. Use my name. That's no problem. But I don't really think anything is going to work out for you. You know, so don't get your hopes up. But by all means, try. You know, I could be wrong. So, you know, then he had to go out and talk to Willie and Ibu about something, and then he came back. He said, you know, you could really help me out. Do you know where Horace Andy is? I said, yeah, he's at 40 Huntington Street in Hartford, apartment 4C or whatever it was, you know. And this is his phone number. He says, you have his phone number? I said, yeah. And I rattled it off to him. And I said, well, what do you want Horace for? He said, well, I want to do a record with him for my own label. He's got a big tune in England going on right now. And he had been over there doing shows. I didn't realize he was back. I said, yeah, I talked to him last week. And he said, great. You know, let's call him. So we called him and Horace picked up and they're talking, you know, Andy's in my office and blah, blah, blah. And so we make an appointment to come down and meet with Lister the next week. So we go down. This time I drove down and we met with Lister and he got us the gig at my father's place, which was the big club at that point. And he said to Horace, you know, I need you to go to Jamaica and do some recording. And Horace said, Andy, you should come. I want you to go. And of course, I'd always wanted to go to Jamaica, but I had no idea how to do it. And I said, do you think so? And he goes, yeah, you'd get a lot of work. The girls would love you. You'd play a lot of sessions. You know, you do really well there. And I go, well, that sounds like a good idea. I was going to go to New York, but this sounds more interesting. And I thought, you know, it's going to be a lot easier to go to Jamaica with somebody like Horace than to just cold call people like Bullwacky in New York, you know, with my Connecticut voice on the phone and say I'm a reggae guitar player. You know, this is 1980. There weren't a lot of us then. And so I said to Horace, well, I'll need a work permit. He goes, you don't need a work permit. It's Jamaica. I said, you know, if it works out, I'll be glad I have a work permit. So I tried applying for a work permit and the Jamaican embassy laughed at me because what I didn't realize was that the country was undergoing tremendous turmoil with this big election coming up between the two parties, one of which was a socialist party, the other was a capitalist party. And there was a lot of violence and people were fleeing the country and everybody's trying to come to America. So the idea that an American was going to go to Jamaica and work as a musician just seemed absurd to them. So they blew me off. You know, I went down and filled out the forms, but they never called me. And Horace kept saying, you know, as soon as you're ready, as soon as you have the permit, we'll get a flight. And he waited 6 months. I mean, it was amazing because there he was with somebody who wanted to do a record with him and he wasn't going to do it unless I was going to go with him. So, so anyway, there was a guy in Hartford named Colin Bennett, who was the Jamaican consulate's representative in Hartford, which at that point had the second or third largest Jamaican population outside of New York City in America. Wow. So they had enough Jamaicans at that point, so it made sense to have a consular representative there. And Mr. Bennett I knew him from the West Indian Club, or he knew me, or he'd seen me. And I explained to him what I wanted to do. And he looked at me and I can only imagine what he was thinking. But he said, I think, you know, they're not treating you fairly. You have an offer from a Jamaican to go there and record. You want to do it. He wants to do it. You're trying to do it the right way. You're respecting the country and trying to do this legitimately, and they should be helping you rather than not doing anything. So he called them, and within a couple of days, I had the permit. I don't know what he said, but so I called Horace, and we got on a plane, and we went to Jamaica, and it was insane. I got off the plane, and I go to the bathroom, and this guy in there is trying to buy US dollars from me for Jamaican dollars, which I didn't know anything about. I figured they had their own money, but I figured you would go to a bank and change the money. And this guy's trying to do it in the restroom, and the way he was doing it indicated it was illegal. So I said, no, I'm not doing that. And we went through customs. We got outside, and 15 people come up to Horace and swarm him, and he starts giving them money. And then we get in a taxi, and we go to Kingston, and we get out at Crossroads. No, we didn't get out. Crossroads is kind of like Times Square. That would be like the equivalent. It's the place where all the vans come, and it's really the center of Kingston proper. And we're driving through Crossroads, and all of a sudden this car jumps out, this car stops, and these guys jump out and start shooting. And it's like the middle of the day, and there's, hundreds of people on the street, and they're shooting, and everybody's ducking, and I'm going, is it like a movie? And Horace goes, no, it's politics. I go, what have I gotten into? So then we go to Halfway Tree, which is sort of like, it's one of the other major centers in Kingston. And we get out to get a coconut, and these two higglers get into a fight, and one of them breaks a Heineken bottle and chops the other one's face up with it while we're eating a coconut. And then we go to Tough Gong, which is up the road from the old Tough Gong where Bob Marley lived and did all the recording while he was alive, obviously. And Horace went in there to talk with somebody, and this old-time rock steady drummer named Hugh Malcolm is hanging out in the yard, and he comes up to me and he starts haranguing me and saying, you're an American thief, you've come to Jamaica to steal our music and make $1 million with it. And he's just going off on me, and of course we're drawing a crowd, and everybody wants to see how the new guy is going to react to being challenged. And
wow,
and
this is all on your first day?
This is within the first hour of getting in Kingston, like getting out of the airport. So
what was going on in your head? Were you second guessing yourself?
Maybe try 12th guessing. I had no reference point with it, because apart from my experience with Everton, all the Jamaicans that I knew in Hartford were friendly. They were welcoming. They were, the tourist board Jamaican kind of thing. I'm not saying that in anything other than a complimentary manner. The sort of popular image of Jamaica, that was what these people were, and that was what I knew. And I figured if I went to Jamaica, it would be more of the same. I didn't realize there's going to be all this other stuff. So finally, we go get in another cab, and we go to Vineyard Town to stay with Freddie McKay's family. And Freddie was a singer that recorded for Coxsone at the same time that Horace did, one of the early important reggae labels. And they were very good friends. And the idea was we were going to stay with Freddie's in-laws in Vineyard Town overnight, and then we were going to go out to his place in Portmore, which is like a suburb of Kingston, and stay there. So his in-laws were lovely people, and his wife Marcy was there, and he had a little son whose name I simply cannot remember, young boy, like 3 or 4 years old. And they fed us this wonderful Jamaican food, and they were really lovely to me. And they had a bed for me to sleep in. And, it was a crowded house, but it was nice, and it was familiar, and like a house with beds and rooms and stuff. And So I got into bed, and the mosquitoes discovered me. And I don't know what it is about me, but all the 5 years, 5.5 years I was in Jamaica, I was a mosquito magnet. They loved me. If there was one mosquito within a mile of me, he was going to find me and try to bite me. And while the mosquitoes are eating me, a tropical storm is coming up, and it starts winding and, raining and torrential this and that. And then the gunfire starts because Vineyard Town is right near a place called McGregor Gully, which is a really tough area. And the helicopter gunships were flying over McGregor Gully to see if they could see where the gunmen were. So there's helicopters, there's torrential rains, there's mosquitoes biting me, there's gunfire, there's people screaming. And I'm lying in bed, I can't sleep, and I'm going, what did I do? So that was the first day.
Wow.
So the next day we went downtown to Randy's, which is the same people that have VP Records now, the world's biggest independent label. And Pat Chin, the matriarch, was behind the counter selling records, and there around the corner from VP is this place called Idler's Rest. And that was traditionally the musicians' unofficial hiring hall for the downtown musicians. There were downtown musicians and uptown musicians. And Randy's had originally had a studio over the record store. And Randy's is on the Parade, which was the downtown area of Kingston, which was another juncture where vans came from the country. It was like a transit place. And there was a big square on the Ward Theater, which was like one of the major performance areas. And there were two big record shops, Joe Gibbs Record World and Randy's, on the North Parade. And Idler's Rest was this alley called Chancery Lane, which was in between them. And up Chancery Lane, you had Winston Riley's Techniques record shop and Gregory Isaac's shop, African Museum. And the studio at Randy's was closed because of the violence, but the musicians had all taken to hanging out in the alley, hoping somebody would need them for a session because there were no phones. If you wanted somebody to play a session for you, what you would do would be go to the corner where they were known to hang out and leave a message.
Wow.
And when they came on the corner, they would get the message. And this worked brilliantly. It sounds crazy, but you almost always got your message. You always got your messages. Sometimes you got it later than you would have liked. I missed a few things. I missed recording with Jimmy Cliff because I was somewhere else.
Wow.
And by the time I got back to my corner the next day, the session was gone, but that's getting ahead of our story. But anyway, the area on, and the North Parade, and the parade had a square in it, like, like a little park called Hero. I think it's called Heroes Park. I don't know. Forget what it's called. But anyway, there was like a square, a big square in the center of the parade, which is, four sides of businesses around the central square. And then there were, higglers, people selling fruits and vegetables from the country, and people selling cigarettes and single oranges and stuff like that. And there was a mobile record shack. There was a guy named King Wani who had a record shack. And Jamaican nicknames are very literal. King Wani had one arm, hence the name. And he was a singer, but his main business was he had this mobile record shack, and he would drive around to places where there wasn't a record shack and sell records out of the truck. And there were all these vans and buses coming and going and dropping off people from the country, and people were coming and going. It was a big, just a big hubbub, like the center of, there were three centers in those days. Parade, which is closest to the water, and Kingston's the seaport, so the waterfront was very important. And then Crossroads, which is kind of midtown, and then Halfway Tree, which was uptown. And so we went to VP, and then Horace went around to Idler's Rep. We were with Freddie McKay, and we walk up the steps to VP, and I see Delroy Wilson running down the steps with an enormous knife like this, chasing somebody. Like running out of the store with this big knife, waving it and chasing this guy down the steps. And he gets to the bottom of the steps and he starts laughing. And then he puts the knife away, and Horace says, "Welcome, Delroy. Meet my friend here. Name Andy, man. I'm from the States, man." And I've got my suitcase and everything and my guitar, you know, and I've got like my nice clothes on, and I'm standing here in front of VP with my suitcase and my guitar, and this madman waving, you know, this enormous knife, you know, like a disemboweling deer kind of knife, you know. And it wasn't serious, you know. They were just playing. But so I started meeting all the musicians whose names I heard on records, you know, Bobby Ellis and Herman Marcus and Hedley Bennett, and then the Roots Radix were there, you know, Styles Scott and Flabba Holt and Bingy Bunny, and lots and lots of singers, you know, Keith Poppin and Jimmy London, and gosh, I don't remember who all. Gregory Isaacs, you know, he had his shop there, so I met Gregory right away. And I met Winston Riley, you know, as a producer. And then we went out to Portmore, and we worked out a deal where Horace and I would rent a room from Freddie while we were doing the record. So what we didn't count on was how bad the violence was in Kingston. And this guy named Tapazuki, who was a DJ and a producer, had the big hit with Horace in England, and he had royalties for Horace that we were going to use to make the record. And Tapa was from a JLP area, and Horace is from Almontown, which is a PNP area. And the violence was so bad, if you were from one neighborhood, you couldn't go into the other neighborhood. So Tapa couldn't come out, and Horace couldn't go in and get the money. And then we started going around and meeting producers. We met Bunny Lee, and we met King Tubby, who was wonderful. And we started meeting these other people, and Horace had been through them before and didn't want to work for them again. And he was getting more and more frustrated and discouraged, and he was horrified by the violence. And I was horrified by it. You know, it was, you turn on the radio and 19 people died in West Kingston last night. And, you know, this was like every day you would be getting these reports of people getting shot in this political violence.
How long had that been going on for?
Pretty much, I think, since May or June. But, you know, it's not like now where we have the internet and everything.
Right.
And, you know, Horace had probably been getting some kind of tips on the phone from people, but it got worse. You know,
were you aware that this was going on when you decided to move there?
Somebody had mentioned it, you know, but it didn't register. Mm-hmm. You know, I was used to small town politics. My parents were in the Democratic Party, you know, and they went to town meetings and stuff, and everything was very civilized.
Right.
You know, it was a majority Republican town, you know, and my father lost every time he ran for anything, but there was no malice in it. He just didn't have as many votes as somebody else, you know. So anyway, we for 3 weeks we sort of banged around Kingston, and I was actually too scared to go most of the time. But August 4th is Independence, and there were always lots of stage shows around Independence. And Horace and Freddie wanted to go see the Song Festival finals. So we did, and we saw Stanley Turbines won that year, and Roland Alfonso played from the Scatolites, and I was very excited to meet him and Stanley and Fab Five. You know, it's like I was meeting people. And then we went to the Carib the next day to see a big Independence Day show, and it was a daytime show, like an afternoon show. And it was just great. You know, Bongo Herman was there, who was another friend of Horace's, and he became like my big brother. All these guys were really looking out for me, and there was lots to look out for, and I can't get into all the stories, but they saved me from very serious things going wrong more than once. And we went to the Carib, which is like the Apollo. You know, it was the one of those small theaters where every seat is really good and the acoustics are great. And we saw the Tamlins, who had a big hit with Baltimore, and General Echo, who was a legendary DJ that got killed a few months later. And Bongo Herman was on the show, and Barrington Levy. And we went backstage after the show to say hello to everybody. And there was this, and I met Joe Higgs, who was the guy who taught the Wailers how to sing harmony. And, you know, and the Tamlins and all the artists and everything. And these guys were much more like the Jamaicans I was used to. You know, people were friendly and stuff. And, oh, you're a musician from America, you know, that's interesting, so on and so forth. And then there was this small guy who looked at me very intently, and he came up to Horace and Freddie, and he said, you know, who's your friend? And Freddie said, his name is Andy. He's a very good guitarist from America. And Junjo said, this guy, and they introduced me, his name was Junjo. And Junjo said to Freddie, you know, I want to record you. I'm having a session on Monday at Channel 1. Come by and bring your friend. And so I go, wow, I'm going to go to a studio in Jamaica, you know, and that was the whole point of going, but we couldn't go because we didn't have any money ourselves. Now, it turned out that Horace had bought a ticket that was good for 3 weeks. And his ticket was actually up on Monday. I bought one for 6 months because in the back of my mind, I thought, well, you know, if this works, I won't want to go home right away. So we went home, and I was really excited. And Horace said, you know, I think we should go back. We can't make the record. And, you know, and this is not the Jamaica I remember. I don't want to be here anymore. I'm really upset by everything that's happening. I just want to go home. I just want to go back to America. This isn't the country I remember. I want to go home. I want to go back to America. You know, he was married at the time, and they had a little baby, and goes, I want to go back to my family. You know, we'll figure out our next move. And I said, well, but I could go to the studio. And he goes, I think you should come back. And I said, but I really want to go. I might get a chance to play. And he goes, well, all right, well, I'll go with you to the studio, but I really think you should come with me to the airport. So we went to the studio, and I decided that I said to him, look, you know, I have a 6-month ticket. If it doesn't work out, I can leave tomorrow. I can get to the airport on my own. Freddie explained to me how to do it. And I'm only missing a day, and then I'll call you as soon as we get back, and we'll figure out what we're going to do next. And he goes, I really don't like this. I'm worried about you. Horace met my parents, you know, and they liked him very much. And he said, I don't know what I would tell your parents if anything happened to you and I'd come back without you. You know, I don't feel good about this. And he tried to talk me out of it, you know, basically most of the morning. And finally he said, look, Horace, I really want to do this. And he looked very sad. He said, okay, if you're going to do this, let me talk to Freddie. So he and Freddie went off and talked. And he came back and he said, Freddie has agreed that he will watch out for you, but you have to do everything. You have to promise me you're going to do everything he says and be really, really careful because this is very dangerous here. Of course, I figured that out by now. But he said, I'm not happy about this. But he says, do you want me to call your parents? And I said, no, you know, they'll worry if you come back without me. I'll just come back. If I decide to come back right away, I'll come back and I'll call them from the airport, and, you know, that'll be that. I don't want you to in the position where you have to explain to my parents what I'm doing. And he goes, well, I really don't feel good about this. But anyway, we went to Channel 1 and we're still arguing about this or talking about it. And the Channel 1 was in a place called Whitfield Town, which is really one of the roughest areas in Kingston. It's a P&P area. And they're actually like bullet markings on the studio. If you look at any of the pictures of Channel 1, and you zoom in, you can see these like chunks out of the walls. They're bullet holes or bullet marks.
Mm.
And it was this concrete building, and it was the studio. It was run by these Chinese Jamaican guys named the Hook Kims. It was a whole family, and it had been an ice cream parlor and with a jukebox, and they got interested in the music business because of the jukeboxes. And then one of them went to Dynamic and saw a recording session and fell in love with the idea of having a recording studio. So they decided they were going to turn the ice cream parlor into a recording studio, and they went to New York and they went to Electric Ladyland and bought the same board that they had for Electric Lady and brought it down to the ice cream parlor and ripped everything up and turned it into a studio, and they had no idea what they were doing. So, they bought all this gear, and they had got an engineer to kind of help them set it up. And then they had Sly and Robbie come in for a weekend to play. They paid them to come in and play, and they figured out how to record the bass and the drums, and Sly and Robbie listen to the tapes and say, do this, do that. And when it sounded good to Sly and Robbie, they were open for business. And they rapidly became, in the early 70s and mid 70s, one of the most influential studios. They had the best bass and drum sound ever, as far as I'm concerned. And they had these enormous JBL speakers that they used to blow up every 6 weeks. I guess they had extra ones because one would blow up and you come back the next day and they'd have it replaced. And the neighborhood was really poor, but it was actually very safe for musicians because they took such pride in the studio. People came from all over the world to record at Channel One or to look at Channel One. And there was really nothing else going on in Whitfield Town apart from the usual ghetto kind of stuff that people do to survive. And here they had this iconic place in their midst. And the Hook Hims, we had grown up in the neighborhood. Mama Hook Him actually lived upstairs. Yeah, and there were a couple. Jojo was just passed recently, was the brother that did the international stuff, and Ernest was the guy who really ran the studio. Big tough Chinese guy, and he actually did some of the engineering. But by the time I got there, he had hired other engineers, and he was basically the studio manager. And the neighborhood was the studio. When you recorded at Channel One, they were invariably anywhere from 5 to 2 or 3 dozen people in the studio with you. And by in the studio, I don't mean in the control room. I mean in the tracking room. And they would be sitting there, and they had a gatekeeper named Zebby, who was this crotchety old dude that decided whether you could come in or not. And he used to give me a hard time, but the first time I came in, I was with Horace and Freddie, who of course he knew, and he let me in. And I walked in, and there are all these people in this tiny control room, and there's a bigger room out in the studio, and there's all these people, rolling spliffs and, barefoot with polyester pants on, and, these belts that they used to have that didn't have a buckle. They sort of, I don't know what the technical term for it is, but you weave the belt under these hoops.
Oh,
and
yeah.
and they had, hats and stuff and cigarettes, home roll, cigarettes, and they're taking the cigarettes apart and mixing it with the weed and smoking and drinking beer and stuff. And I'm going, and it was nothing like A&R where we'd done In the Light, which was, one of the top studios in the world. And everything was meticulous and perfectly maintained and everything. This looked like, it looked like somebody's clubhouse. You couldn't believe there was recording going on. And people are in there setting up, and this guy comes in and sits down at the organ, and this bigger guy comes in and goes, move your bomber clot and get up, and like sweeps him away like a fly. And it turned out that was Steely. The guy played on all the Roots Radix and records and was part of Steely and Clevie later. but he was an upcoming guy. And the big guy was Winston Wright, who was the godfather. You know, he was he and Jackie Mittoo were the most influential organ players probably in Jamaican history. And Winston, Winston was the boss. He was the man. And so these people are banging on drums and they're tuning up guitars and they're playing the piano and they're doing this and the other thing. And everybody's looking at me like, what are you doing here? And I had with me my guitar in a hard case, and my father had built me this pedal board. He'd seen me plugging in my effects, and one time when I was visiting my parents, I had a gig, so I was plugging in my effects to test the batteries or something. And he saw me plugging everything by hand. He said, Andy, that doesn't look very efficient. What if we made a box for them and it had a power supply and a cable, and then you could just take out your box and everything would be there where you need it, and you wouldn't have to plug everything in. You could set up faster. In the 70s, nobody had pedal boards unless you were like, Robin Trower or somebody. Right. This was not something the average musician had. There was one other guy in Hartford who had a pedal board that he'd made himself. And so my dad being willing to make me this pedal board was a big deal, So I brought it with me to Jamaica, and it had a phase shifter on it, a flanger and a compressor and a distortion plus. And it had the power cord hanging out of the side, and it had a little handle and a removable wooden top. It was like a little suitcase. So I walk into channel 1 with this thing, and the cable is dangling out of the suitcase. And these guys are all looking at me like I have 6 heads, and the vibe is not friendly. I'm just kind of sitting in the corner, going, what happens now?
You're the only white guy?
Yes.
Was that typically the case, even in general when you were in Jamaica?
Well, there were plenty of white people in Jamaica, but they would drive around in cars with the windows rolled up and tinted and stuff. And the only white people you saw on foot were from the Peace Corps. And there were white people in some of the businesses, some of the doctors who were white, or if you went to the bank, there might be white people in the bank. But walking around the parts of Kingston that we're discussing, if there were white people there, they owned the business, or they were driving through with the windows rolled up. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it was extremely. It's not like New York, where like everything's mixed up. I was on foot, and the people on foot were black, or they were Indian, or they were mixed. Jamaica is very polyglot, and everybody's mixed up in it. Most people in Jamaica have a number of ethnic groups in their ancestry if you talk to them about it, but predominantly it's African, people of African descent. And the darker you were, generally the poorer you were. So the guys we're talking about were generally from poor backgrounds, and were quite, not just black, but dark black.
Yeah. And
there I am with my melanin challenged self. I mean, even for a white person, I'm kind of pale. And, I have reddish hair and stuff, and I don't do well in the sun. And I'm sitting there in the corner, trying not to be conspicuous, and of course, anything but inconspicuous. So I'm thinking, I'm not ready. I don't know what's going to happen. So Junjo is there, and he kind of nods briefly, but he's engaged with setting up the session, and the engineer is running around moving mics, and this is only the second or third time I'd even been in a studio, or maybe the 5th, I guess, or 6th. I had really very little studio experience. I did one other record in New York, and then a project in Hartford, but those were like, one day here, one day there. I had no real knowledge of how professional studios worked, although I knew how to record things because I'd done it at prep school. But live musicians and all this other stuff, that was new. So I'm standing there going, what's going to happen now? And there was this guy in the crowd who'd been eyeing me with a different aspect from the other people. And he looked at me for a minute, and he stepped forward and stuck out his hand and said, "Hello, I am Bo P. What's your name?" I said, "Andy Bassford." And he shook my hand and he said, "And what is that thing you have under your arm?" Now, Bo P was one of the top guitar players of the era, actually, in reggae history. He's really one of the most important musicians. And I knew who he was because I had all these reggae records. So I was thrilled that I was actually meeting, somebody that I wanted to meet. And he was friendly. And then he was interested in the pedal board because, of course, he had never seen one. So I opened it up and I explained to him how everything worked and the AC adapters instead of the 9-volt batteries. And of course, Bo P was one of the main men on the scene. So with Bo P talking to the newcomer and the newcomer having something Bo P could learn from and being willing to show him, I had no idea. I mean, the guy asked me a question. He's a fellow guitar player.
Right.
You got a pedal board? Let me see it. We're geeks, of course. Sure. Here, look at this. It does this. It does this. It does this. Right. So we all of a sudden, we're two guitar geeks, and the entire atmosphere in the studio changed. And if he hadn't done that, I don't know how the day would have gone.
Mm.
But that was really a critical moment. And I found out later there was a lot of resonance to it because what had happened a few weeks before that was the Clash had come down to record. And
wow.
They had made an absolute mess of things. They didn't handle the local people properly. They weren't sensitive to the dynamics of what was going on. They were rock stars. They were going to come down and make a reggae rock record, and Mikey Drew was going to produce, and they wanted to rent Flabba's bass because they thought the bass had the magic sound, and Flabba quite properly said, if you want my bass, hire me to play on the record. I'm not renting my bass.
Right.
Hire me to play or play your own bass. And they bought dinner for the entire studio the first night. And of course, Channel 1 being where it was, the next night there were twice as many people back expecting the Clash to buy them dinner. Instead of 30 dinners, they're buying 60, and then they wanted to play really loud and the engineers were freaking out because the meters were pinning, and it just didn't go well. And I think they abandoned the project after 2 or 3 days. And then they went home and wrote Safe European Home about it. I mean, I don't know if that's the song they wrote, but they came back with a very, chastened attitude, I guess. And the locals were still, I guess, fairly offended about the way the Clash had conducted themselves. And I wasn't there, so I can't say, they rubbed people the wrong way. So, pasty-faced people from abroad coming to Channel 1, there was already like a track record of that not going well. So I think that was part of the problem. And then, which I guess inadvertently I diffused by being a guitar geek.
Right.
Oh, what's that under your arm? It's pedal board. Want to see it? Not like, oh, it's pedal board. Don't you know what that is? I guess I could have had that attitude, but it's just not the way I think. So we started, and then what kind of guitar do you have? And I had this SG that I'd put a preamp in. There was a schematic in Guitar Player magazine about how to put a preamp that had overdrive in your guitar, which was pretty cool, actually. It sounded great for that. It didn't sound great for playing clean, so I ended up taking it out of the guitar 6 months later. But at that point, I had this preamp with treble and bass controls and distortion and all this cool stuff in it. So I was showing this to Bo P, and he also had an SG, and he's going, "Could you build me one?" And I said, "Sure, buy me the parts. I have the schematic. I can build you one." And so me just sort of, we're just being guitar players. And the onlookers are going, oh, this is not somebody coming in and telling us what to do. So I think that was a big factor in everything that followed. So the session started, and the way it worked was the singer went out, and he would start singing, and the band would be playing and banging things and fiddling and finding chords and finding keys and stuff. And then they would run the tune, and it would sound a little rough. And then they'd run the tune again, and it sounded like a record. And they would play this thing 2 or 3 times, and they'd go, that's it, next tune. And the process would happen again. There's no music. There's no rehearsal. They obviously didn't know the songs in advance. I'm looking at this and going, I've never seen anything like it. How can you make a record like that? You know, with Horace, we had run through the songs first. He had showed me the chords, and, you know, and I played some things, and, you know, I went over to his apartment and we worked on stuff. And before we went to the studio, I had a good idea of what he wanted me to play. And he played guitar on the session. So he was showing the other musicians the chords on the session, but these singers didn't play guitar. They were just singing. And these guys were sitting around and finding parts and keys and chords and harmonizing the thing and coming up with bass lines and intros and stuff on the spot. And they're knocking these tunes out one every 20 minutes, one every 15 minutes. I'm going, I can't believe this. There's no way I can hang with this. This is crazy. What am I doing? You know, that was a constant theme for the first couple of years. What am I doing? And so anyway, and of course, Channel 1 said to me the best sounding place to hear reggae in the universe was that control room. That API board was incredible for reggae. I don't remember the power amps they used, but they had some nice outboard gear. They didn't have a lot of stuff, but everything that they had, and I'm not a big expert on outboard gear, but everything I remember seeing at Channel 1, I now see on these vintage sites for ridiculous amounts of money. I think they had Pultecs they had these green things. I think they were Pultecs, and they used one of the tape machines for a slapback. They had a 4-track machine and a 16-track machine and two 2-track machines, and they used one of the machines for echo. And it wasn't unheard of, apparently, for the echo machine tape to somehow get siphoned off and show up before the actual release did. I mean, I didn't see that, but I heard stories. So anyway, after five or six songs, Junjo, you know, by now had acknowledged me, and I said, you know, what's going to happen? He said, well, you know, you'll get your chance. Be patient. So after 5 or 6 songs, he went out there, and I guess he talked to Bo P, and he said, you know, Johnny Guitar, go in and string up. So I went in, and I think I'd been introduced to everybody. I think at some point Bo P had introduced me to everybody. And the other guitar player was named Sowell, who did a lot of stuff for Coxon and Jimmy Cliff and went to England shortly thereafter. Gladdy Anderson was the piano player who played on everything from the Rocksteady days down to dancehall. He's on Mother and Child Reunion. He's on Hold Me Tight. He's on the Israelites, you know. Winston Wright was the organ player, and Flabaholt was the bass player, and Style Scott was the drummer. Let me get rid of that. Hold on 1 minute. Can't talk, call me back. So this was the early incarnation of Roots Radix, who ended up being the premier studio band of the first half of the 80s and played Night Nurse and all those things. just dozens, hundreds of hits, probably hundreds, And at this point, they were kind of up and coming, as was Junjo. Junjo had just had his first big record with Barrington Levy, and he was a man on the move. And so it was pretty exciting. And I didn't really know who any of these guys were except Gladdy and Winston because they were older. And Bo Peak, he was older. He's a little younger than me. The other guys were, I guess, 4 or 5 years younger. I don't remember. But anyway, I plugged into the amplifier, which was this silver-faced bandmaster that they had there, and I had a tuning fork, which is how we used to tune in the pre-tuning electronic tuning days. I had a tuning fork for my violin days, A440, and you'd bang it and you'd hold it over the pickup and you'd get an A going through your amp, and even in a loud club you could tune to it. And that's how we used to tune, with the tuning fork through the pickups. And the big bands had Kahn strobo tuners, but we weren't big. We didn't have one of those. It was like $300-400, So I tuned with my tuning fork, and then I got my first surprise of the day. The piano wasn't anywhere near 440. So I played a chord, and Gladdy played something, and I went, "Oh, I'm not in tune with the piano." And he goes, "No, man, piano no right, So I said, "Okay, could you give me an E, please?" So he gives me an E, and I retune the guitar, and it's down, must have been down like 10 cents or something. It was like around 430. Mind you, the organ is a 440, because the organ is coming off the internal oscillator. So part of the channel 1 sound, you can actually hear it on a lot of the records, particularly when the piano player goes up high and plays fills. You can hear that the piano is not in tune with the organ in any way, shape, or form. So I got in tune with the piano as best I could. And while I was doing this, Winston Wright started noodling on the organ, and he played a lick, and I played it back at him. He looked at me. And he played another one a little more complicated, and I played it back at him. He looked at me. And then we started jamming a little bit, and everybody's kind of looking at like, what's going on here? We're supposed to be making records. Who is this guy? What does he think we're doing? And Winston realized what was going on, and he cut it off. He said, "Well, that was fun, but now we have to get serious." And Michael Prophet came in. Was it Barrington Levy? I can never remember. It was one of the two of them. I think it was Michael. Michael Prophet came in, and he started singing, and immediately Gladdy figured out what key he was in and harmonized what he was singing. And I'm looking around going, "Oh, I don't know what to do." And Flabba looks at me and goes, "Play with me, play my bass line." So I did that as best I could. And Sowell came up with an intro in no time flat. And by this time, Style had figured out what he was going to play. And they said, "Ready," and we started running the tune. And we ran the tune, and then we did it again. They said, "Yeah, man, I hit that." And I said to Winston, "I think I played a wrong note." He said, "Shh. The producer likes it." "All right, man. Don't worry about it." All right. So then I guess it was Barrington Levy came out and did the next tune. So I did 2 songs with them, and it was both the same thing. Before I realized we were doing a take, it was recorded. And then Bo Peak came back out and said very politely, "Okay, it's my turn now." So I unplugged and I went back into the control room, and and they kept recording. And Junjo said, "Johnny Guitar, how much you work for?" And I said, "Well, $30 a song," because that was what I'd gotten from Everton for In the Light. But I didn't realize Jamaican money was half of American money. But I hadn't figured that out yet. I hadn't been there that long, And he started laughing because the standard rate was $40 a song. He said, $30 a song, yeah, man. They check you tomorrow. And I said, okay. I mean, I didn't know. I was hoping to get paid there. But everybody's in the control rooms laughing. He's not going to pay you. He's not going to pay you. Don't even think about it. And I'm going, oh, shit, what if I don't get paid? But, what was I going to say? So I sat there and then Fred and watched the rest of the session, which was equally amazing. Freddie went out and cut a couple of songs, and I guess they must have recorded 12, 14, 16 songs, some incredible amount of songs during this day. And then we went back to the parade and got the bus back to Portmore where we were staying. And Freddie said, you know, you did all right. You did a good job. And I said, well, I could have played better. He goes, no, you were fine. He says, I don't know if he's going to pay you though. I said, well, at least I got to be in a Jamaican studio and meet some of the people I wanted to meet. So however it works out is fine. So we went to Idler's Rest the next day and we're hanging out, which is what everybody did. Most of the Jamaican music business consisted of waiting on your corner for somebody to hire you. And of course, with the election going on, all the violence, there wasn't a lot of recording going on. So a lot of very broke musicians sitting in the dust all day trying to amuse themselves. And, you know, people as the foreigner, people would hit on me and try to get money out of me and stuff. And, you know, there's lots of street adventures. But we got there around 10:30. And about 11:30, Junjo comes walking up the alley. And he sees me, yeah, man, Johnny Guitar, Irie. And he takes out his wallet and he gives me $60. Goes, Johnny Guitar, I like your star. I have more work for you, see? Stick around. And Freddie said, he paid you. I said, yeah. So of course I got, yeah, man, buy me a beer now. Because they saw I had money, you know, so I had to buy some beers, but at least I got paid. Yeah. So, you know, I went back and I thought, you know, I played on one session. Maybe I could play on two if my money holds out. So, you know, my parents had given me a little money to go down. I'd sold some gear to get down there. I sold a original Silvertone and a Paisley Telecaster. Oh, you know, I sold some great stuff to buy the plane ticket. I had a little bit of money, but I didn't have a job in a band. And how are we doing for time? We got like a little under an hour left. Okay, so anyway, having set the initial the baptism by fire, what ended up happening was that Bo and I became very friendly, and word got out that I could play, and I started getting a little more work. And then I ran into a guy named Jimmy Becker, who was the other American down there. And he was actually playing with Lloyd Parks and We the People, which was the band I ended up joining 6 months later. And he was a harmonica player. He'd come up in the Chicago blues scene. So the whole idea of going into the hood for, you know, music and adventure he'd been doing that when I was at prep school, you know, so he was much more streetwise than I was. And he would hang out at Channel One. I went there to work and I left. Jimmy would go down there and hang out and go to dances. He was much ballsier than I was. But he gave me a really good tip early on. He said, wherever you go in Kingston, carry your guitar. And I said, why? Won't people steal it? He goes, no. Everybody here respects musicians. That's not so true now, but it was true then. And he said, guitars are uncommon here. If they see you with it, they will assume you know how to play it. And that was the best advice I got. So once I figured out where all the studios were, I would do a little routine. I would get on the van from Portmore, and I was trying to make my money last, so I would eat a Kisco Pop for breakfast, which are these little ice pop things that you squeeze. That would be breakfast and lunch. And wow. And the van was $2 each way, and the Kisco Pops were like 50 cents. So, and van rides were in Kingston were 40, 50, and 60 cents, depending on where you were going. So for $6 a day, I could hit most of the studios in Kingston, get to and from Portmore, and wow. Eat 2 Kisco Pops. So wow. This is what I did. And I'd go from studio to studio, and I just wanted to get in there and see what was going on. And eventually people got curious, and then they would take the guitar out and play. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff just playing for people or just plugging into an amp when somebody went to the bathroom, all kinds of just stuff. But the basic idea was I went to all the studios as much as possible, hoping somebody wouldn't show up or somebody would get curious, and it actually worked. And while I was doing that, I was figuring out all the guitar stuff that I thought I knew, and actually, once I got there, realized how bad and how inadequate my knowledge was, which is probably a good segue to go to the questions about actual guitar playing.
Yeah, so one specific thing that I wanted to ask you is I don't have a lot of experience playing reggae. I've played in a couple of reggae cover bands here and there, just subbing on gigs, and it kind of made me realize how little I actually know about reggae. So one thing I wanted to ask you is, like with jazz music, you have jazz standards, which are, traditional jazz songs that if you're a jazz musician, people typically expect you to know these songs. Are there kind of similar songs with reggae as well, kind of like essential reggae songs for somebody to know?
Yes, that's a wonderful question. And one of the most important things I had to figure out quickly, or that I had to come to terms with, was the reggae standards are the Rocksteady, Studio One, and Treasure Isle, two of the three big labels of the mid to late 60s. The big songs on those labels, people would recycle the bass lines and the chords a lot. And they would change the drum patterns and change the lyrics and the melody. And you would have a new song on this template. So it's kind of like I Got Rhythm Changes. A song like Answer, which is A to D, and dub up, bub up, ba da ba da bub up, bub up, bub up, ba da ba da bub up. That comes from a Slim Smith tune called Never Let Go, and then it went through a bunch of permutations, but it's the same bass line. And I ended up recording a variant of it with Dennis Brown that became a big hit called I Can't Stand It, which is the same bass line, different melody, different lyrics. And to be a working reggae musician in those days, you needed to know the Studio One and Treasure Isle bass lines and rhythm patterns. And it would be like knowing the jazz musician knowing Honeysuckle Rose and I Got Rhythm and Indiana and Cherokee and those kind of things. And those things, of course, aren't copyrightable. Bass lines are not copyrightable. There was one situation where Leroy Sibbles actually got paid for one, but that's a long story that takes us away from what we need to do. But what I realized after I've been doing it for a while was that these are the tunes that Jamaicans wanted to hear. They were not the tunes I played in the Mighty Venturians. They certainly weren't Bob Marley and the Wailers tunes, because almost none of Bob's tunes are these kinds of standards. There's two or three of them, but the vast majority of them are things like the heptones and melodians. Those late 60s recordings that they did, a lot of those songs became versions. These songs that people did multiple versions of over the same chord and bass line patterns. The drumming would change, other things around it would change. But these bass lines persist, and you still hear some of them. When the dance hall thing came in the mid 80s, that changed a lot of this, but in the 90s, they started getting away from that. But really from the mid 70s through the 90s, these bass lines were essential knowledge, and you still need them. A lot of the music I play with Derek is based on those standards. And what you need to know is the intro and the chords and the bass line. And you need to know the popular records that were made off of those basic ingredients. And if you're really into it, the differences in the guitar strum or any other little idiomatic parts that will identify one from the other. And it's really music of great subtlety, as simple as it is.
Mm.
So yeah, it's a great question. There are standards, and a big part of learning reggae is learning those standards.
Mm-hmm. And I feel like when I subbed in this reggae band the few times, initially when they sent me over the set list, I just assumed it was going to be like a bunch of Bob Marley songs, but I was surprised that there really wasn't much Bob Marley. I mean, maybe a couple here and there, but who would you say? I mean, I feel like when most people think of reggae, they think of Bob Marley and Peter Tosh. Who would you say are some of the other kind of essential reggae musicians that aren't as known as Bob Marley?
Well, Bob Andy, the Heptones, the Melodians, a lot of the vocal groups, the 60s vocal groups, a lot of those songs ended up being standards. Dennis Brown really is the most important singer, in my opinion, and most people's. The way I describe it is Bob Marley was the world's reggae singer. Dennis Brown is Jamaica's reggae singer. And Dennis was Bob's favorite singer. So I worked with him for 8 years. So at the height of his career, so I saw all that stuff up close. Gregory Isaacs, the way but reggae really in the classic era was a singles music. So where you find these things are on the anthologies, like Trojan anthologies, because Trojan was the label in England that these songs would get licensed to. And their compilations are generally very good primers. Now, what I did, because I didn't know any of this stuff existed, was there were 2 radio stations. One was called RJR and one was called JBC. And RJR was more the music one, and JBC was like the BBC, sort of the official station of the government. And they had music programs, but RJR was more music and less news and public affairs stuff. And RJR had these oldies shows on about 8 o'clock at night, and they'd go from 8 to midnight, and they would play all these songs. And when I moved to Kingston and joined We the People in 1981, what I would do is come home from the studio looking for work, eat dinner, and then turn on RJR and just play along with whatever was on the radio, because I figured if it was on the oldies station, it was a popular tune, somebody was going to ask me to play it. And that's really where I figured out how the music worked. And then sometimes it wouldn't be until years later when I actually had to back the artist that I'd find out the name of the song, because they never announced the names of the songs of the artists. And I still have these cassettes that I recorded off the radio of all these things to practice with. So that was what I did. And then when I joined We the People, they knew all these songs and they were not going to bother to show me any of them because it was sink or swim. And when we did country dances, the first set would be what was ever on the radio at the moment, the top 40 Jamaican records of the moment, the soca records, American R&B ballads. And there would be this long break where you'd eat an enormous amount of food and drink beer. And I mean, it was a really long break. We would have gotten killed in the clubs in Connecticut for breaking that long. But nobody was in a hurry. And then the second set would be the history of Jamaican music in reverse. We would start playing reggae tunes, go back through rocksteady, then go through ska and the Scatolites, all the Scatolites tunes, and then end up with Oh Carolina, which is always the last song of the night, and is one of the first Jamaican record to have Rastafarian drumming on it, or at least the first popular one. And it's considered one of the fundamental records in Jamaican musical history. Shaggy actually covered it years later, and it was one of his first big hits. He did like an electro version of it. But that was always the last song of the night. So I learned these songs on the bandstand. And again, they wouldn't tell me what they were, but the band knew them. They knew hundreds of them. And they would just go from one to the other. It was like one long disco medley. And there I was just trying to catch up. And sometimes they'd play a tune and I'd go, oh, I know that from RJR, and I would know the guitar part.
Right.
But that's how I learned.
So it's kind of almost like when you learn a bunch of jazz standards, you see a lot of similar, formulas throughout the song, and you'll be like, oh, I
Yeah.
recognize this from that tune. It's kind of like the same thing, but with reggae.
Yeah, there were common elements, and it was really immersion. And what I think separates me from a lot of the people that play reggae that aren't Jamaicans is that the first 10 years of my career, I was playing Jamaican music for Jamaican audiences with Jamaican musicians. And the expectations I had to meet as a musician were those of trying to please a Jamaican audience. And this is an experience I could never have gotten in America, no matter how much I transcribed and dissected and everything else.
Right.
Because when you play the music in its native habitat for the people for whom it was, who created it and for whom it was created, you get to see why it works. And what about it are the essential things that resonate with Jamaicans. And when I made my own record, a couple of years ago, the knowledge of that was invaluable. And the best response I got to the record was a traditional Jamaican radio, because I had learned the rules so well.
Mm-hmm.
And there are rules, there are right and wrong things to do. I can codify some of them. A lot of it is just immersion and experience and instinct and being able to reference things and go, this sounds like that. I could take this little part from that and twist a little bit and that'll fit here, that kind of stuff.
Right.
But the real thing, and I think something that we don't talk about enough when you talk about people playing other forms of music they didn't grow up with, when I was interested in B.B. King, of course, white blues was very big, and the classic thing that people were saying, can white people sing the blues? And I think Bonzo Dog Band had this thing, can blue men sing the whites, And, and as a kid growing up in rural Connecticut, the difference between me and B.B. King live at the Regal, it's just just like outer space. There's no way I could have those cultural reference points unless I'd gone to Chicago and somehow wangled my way into the Regal Theater House Band. And then I would have had a comparable experience.
Right.
But I didn't have the resources or the knowledge or the understanding of anything. I mean, I knew something about music, but what I didn't understand is music in a culture and how it works within the culture that created it. And as far as I'm concerned, the most convincing white blues guitar player is Jimmy Vaughan. And I love Stevie. I love Stevie, but he's not quite as pure in the blues in the classic sense as Jimmy is. And Jimmy is, simpler and sounds more like the older guys, for lack of a better way of putting it.
Mm-hmm.
And I was reading an interview with him and I stumbled on something that actually, in my opinion, explains why he plays the way he does and Stevie played the way he played. Early in Jimmy's career, he was like all blues guitar players, spent a lot of time learning the Freddie King instrumentals, like Hideaway and The Stumble and San Jose and all those things, which are one of the things you really study when you're learning electric, blues guitar, the Freddie King instrumentals. They're, just fabulous textbooks of licks. Probably half of Eric Clapton comes from the Freddie King instrumentals. Mm-hmm. So Jimmy, early in his career, had like a opportunistic, we'll call him, black manager who booked him on the Chitlin circuit as Freddie King Jr. And this is in the late 60s. And back in those days, you did not know what an artist looked like unless they came to your town. or you saw them on a record cover, or maybe on TV, but most of these people didn't get on TV. So there are all kinds of stories of people, you know, impersonating Shirley and Lee, impersonating Fats Domino, because nobody knew what Fats Domino looked like. If you sounded kind of like him and could convince somebody to book you as that, you could maybe get away with it. So anyway, Jimmy got booked with a black band, or like to do, I guess, come in as a guest artist on these Chitlin Circuit gigs as Freddie King Jr. And his set was playing the Freddie King instrumentals. He finessed the problem of not being able to sing like a black guy because he's playing instrumentals. So he actually got through the tour in one piece because he knew the music backwards and forwards, and he didn't have to sing. But I think what makes Jimmy Vaughn different from everybody else who ever did this stuff, maybe Harvey Mandel and Steve Miller, you know, who did come up in Chicago, but they weren't necessarily featured artists. You know, they were playing with people. But Jimmy went out there as the featured artist, you know, and it's conceivable Freddie King could have had a white son. You know, anything can happen, right? So so he went through and he had the experience of playing for an audience who was expecting Freddie King's literal son and having to please them to get out in one piece. And he figured out how to do it. And I think that influenced that experience of having to play it at that level of when you have that much of a personal stake in it, you know, getting paid and getting out of the gig in one piece, you know, you figure out really quickly what your audience wants and what you give it and give it to them. And if you play reggae in America, you figure out what an American audience wants and you give it to them. You know, the white blues guitar players, their audiences liked long guitar solos. So they ended up giving them really long guitar solos. You couldn't go to the Apollo and play like a 10-minute version of Whipping Post. You know, that wasn't going to happen. So, and I'm not saying Dwayne didn't know the difference. You know, I think out of all these people we're discussing, he was also really, really close to the real thing. But somebody like Stevie came up, you know, he played some gigs in front of black people, but basically he was playing, you know, the same clubs in Austin that Commander Cody would have played, or Ray Benson, you know, Asleep at the Wheel. And the different audiences you play for, the different subcultures, have different expectations. So the expectations I had to meet were the same expectations the classic reggae musicians had to meet. We were doing the same gigs, the same venues, playing the same art with the same artists for the same audiences, dealing with this business from the same place. And it's not that I'm that great a guitar player, because I don't think I am, but I did have to play this music well enough for the people who invented it to survive. I did figure out how to do that. But I think that's something we don't talk enough about, is that musicians, and this is regardless, you know, this is classical music, this is anything you want to talk about. A big part of the musician is the audience. What are the audience's expectations? What does the audience want to hear? If the audience wants to hear you shred, you're going to shred. If the audience wants to hear to play the ands of 1, 2, 3, and 4 on G to A minor for 4 minutes, that's what you're going to do. And what you have to do to please your audience, if you do enough of it, that becomes part of who you are as a musician. You just internalize that.
Right.
And I think that is the thing that I have.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I'm not saying other people don't have it, but I know I have it. And particularly at the time I was doing it, I was the only one doing it. The only other guy down there was Jimmy Becker, and his function was a little different as a harmonica player. He was more like a horn guy. He wasn't involved in creating the rhythms. He was playing, you know, as a horns guy would play on them. Mm-hmm. You know, he taught me a lot. I owe him a great deal. It's not to denigrate what he did. And he was ahead of me. You know, he was way ahead of me, a lot of things. But in terms of playing this music for that audience, I had 10 years of it, you know, ahead of a lot of people.
Right. Well, it seems like too, a lot of the scenarios that you were in, you were kind of almost in a position where you had to do it just for your own survival, right?
Well, I probably would have made it home to would have made it to the airport somehow, you know, but uh, I would have come home with my tail between my legs, and I didn't think that was an option.
Yeah. So, and then in terms of Bob Marley too, I mean, one of the things that I think is so interesting about reggae music is I feel like reggae is one of the few genres where if you just go up to somebody on the street, just a random person, and you say, "Hey, can you name a reggae artist?" Most people really only think of Bob Marley. A lot of people might not even be able to really name anybody else. Why do you think that is?
Well, the there are a bunch of factors that created that phenomenon. These aren't necessarily in any order because I'd have to think more about it to give you
Right.
a hierarchy. But the first thing is the guy had the best songs. There are people who say Bob Andy's a better songwriter. Bob Andy wrote some of the greatest songs in Jamaican music history. Bob wrote more of them. Just from a songwriting point of view, which is something I'm really interested in, because after a while I figured out that it was a lot more fun playing sessions when you had a good tune than when you didn't. I started getting more aware of good songwriting after I did sessions for a while and realized how hard it was to come up with a part for a tune that was basically, you know, a dead dog. But the first factor with Bob is the writing. Those songs get covered more than anybody else's songs, and it's not because he's the most famous. It's because so many artists find things in the songs that they can interpret personally. You know, it's like the Beatles. Beatles, you know, Rolling Stones, greatest rock and roll band in the world. You can argue that. Songwriting, two of the best songwriters of the 20th century, in my opinion. And the third string guy would have been the first string guy in any other band of that era. George Harrison would have been in The Dude in The Searchers, you know. He would have been the guy the record company wanted as the key person in the record contract. He was the third guy who was lucky to get one song on a record. That's how great they were. Mm-hmm. You know, but going back to Bob, the first thing is the writing. The second thing is his degree of personal focus. He was the first guy on the bus, and he was the last guy to go to sleep. Bob, you know, once Bob got his break, he was all about business. If there were 10 things to do that would help his career, he was going to do them. If you gave him another 2 at the end of the day, he was going to do them. Mm-hmm. There's very few artists in any genre who are willing to do that. So when you combine that with the level of songwriting, then there's a few more elements. The third thing is he had a really distinctive vocal instrument. You hear Bob, you can hear Bob 2 miles away and know it's him. That voice cuts through anything. You could be listening, you know, in a bomb shelter, and if you could hear the music at all, you know it was Bob singing. For pop success, for mass success, it's one of the most important elements you could possibly have is the distinctive vocal instrument. You know, it explains Johnny Cash, it explains Mick Jagger, it explains Bob Dylan, it explains any number of people, it explains Neil Diamond, you know, explains any number of people where you kind of scratch your heads and go, well, what is it? You know, the way Les Paul put it was, does your mom know it's you when she hears you on the radio? Mm-hmm. He also, in my opinion, is a tremendously underrated singer. A lot of Jamaicans say Bob couldn't sing, And what I think they mean is Bob didn't have a beautiful bel canto instrument like Dennis Brown or John Holt or Hopton Lewis or Delroy Wilson. He didn't have a beautiful voice, but he had a voice that grabbed you by the throat. He was also a tremendous singer rhythmically. He had one of the best pockets of any singer ever. And his diction was immaculate. These are all huge things. And that, you know, when you start adding them up, you start seeing
Right.
what a formidable force he was. He also, I think, he was a great press story. You know, he was a black guy with long hair at a time when long hair was still controversial for white people, and afros are controversial. And here's a guy with dreadlocks. Mm-hmm. So he had a distinctive visual look to the point where everybody else started feeling like they had to grow dreadlocks because he had them, even if they didn't believe in the religion. And then on top of that, he was truly devout. He really believed the religion, and that fueled his writing. It fueled his performance. It fueled his drive. And he was, I never met him, but you can tell from the interviews, he is also an extremely intelligent human being. So, you know, not formally educated perhaps, but he's very quick. You know, whenever you hear an interview with him, there's nothing the interviewer can say to him that throws him for even a second. Yeah. He might take a few seconds to gather his reply, but he's never at a loss for words. He can argue with anybody. So he was also a great leader. You know, I played sessions with his band quite a bit, and they all had wonderful things that they brought to the package, and they were a great band for him. But there's a reason why the band hasn't done anything without Bob in the last 40 years. I mean, they've made records, they've toured, but they're basically touring off the catalog. They haven't. Nobody in that band has contributed anything to the catalog since 1981. That's just a statement of fact. It's not like
is that when he was killed, 1981?
He died. Whether he was killed or not is another question. But he died of cancer.
All right. There's conspiracies around whether or not he was killed, though, right? Because of what was happening while you were there.
Well, he was actually shot earlier, but he didn't die from that. He left Jamaica for most
that's
part
what I'm
after
thinking.
That happened. Peter was shot. Peter was killed. Bob died of melanoma. At least that was the official verdict. As to whether somebody introduced it, there's all kinds of theories. I don't have any knowledge. I've heard many of the stories. I don't know. The official story works for me. I'm not saying that people don't have superior knowledge. I didn't know Bob. I knew his band. You know, I played with those guys. I knew those guys. You know, fine musicians in the sense that Roots Radics were fine musicians, you know, really good at making those kind of records, not songwriters. You know, without the writing and without the lead voice, they're, you know, the thing is basically, you know, going around on a treadmill. So the other part of it is that Bob had a record company, you know, in Ireland, and Chris Blackwell, who was willing to do what it took to break him. And his first few records didn't sell a lot of records. And he got pretty good reviews from the beginning on, but a lot of record companies would have dropped him after Burning, you know, the second Island album. And he just kept going. And obviously Blackwell realized that he had, you know, he had great songs and he had a great work ethic, and he knew how to run a band, and he figured out how to perform. You look at some of the earlier stuff, he's obviously pretty nervous, but by the time you got to bigger stages, he was definitely ready for them. You know, he put the time in on the road. He did everything you would want an artist to do from the point of view of the business. And a lot of artists don't do that, including some of the most talented. Do not do everything. Now, I don't know if Bob had good instincts or if he was following Chris's lead in some of these things. But basically, if something was proposed to him that looked like it was going to advance the cause, he was going to go do it. If that meant he had 200 or 300 days a year or whatever, you go, okay, give me the schedule.
Mm-hmm.
So when you put all those things together and couple it with the fact that he was the first superstar to come from the third world. People from the third world had hits, the Bossa Nova thing, Miriam Makeba, Manu Dibango, you can go through the list of you can go through the top 40 from 1950s through, when we're up to say Graceland, when world music got recognized as a genre. And you can find one-hit wonders, two-hit wonders from various parts of the world. But nobody who's a superstar, nobody who's a rebel, and nobody who advocates a strange religion. So the thing that Bob did that people in America maybe don't get in quite as much as if you spend a lot of time outside of America is that for everybody in every country like Jamaica, not part of the first world, not a big country, everybody looked at Bob and went, wait a minute, that's our guy. And that explains his worldwide popularity. He was the first guy to come outside of the American, England pop axis of superstardom. Every other superstar you can think of was from Britain or America, Anglocentric, Anglophone. The biggest black star when Bob came out was probably James Brown of the Commodores, Earth, Wind and Fire, P-Funk, those kind of groups. Mm-hmm. Wonderful musicians. Not the combination of rebelliousness, incredible songcraft. Bob had better songs than all those guys. The Commodores had some good songs, but just talking about writing songs, Bob was way up on most of them. And he had this whole thing, he beat the system. He came from this little island that was basically known for, coconuts and weed and rum and stuff, agricultural things, and became this international icon, which made everybody who wasn't from America and England think, I can do that. That's possible now. It wasn't possible 10 years ago. So there's all these reasons. He had the right record company, he had the right attitude. He didn't have the right manager for most of his career. He had managers who were good enough. He picked the band was put together around what he needed to sound good. The best background singers. I mean, they're amazing. The I3s, what they did, the Barrett brothers. All the individual elements you can go through, and it was state of the art 70s stuff that was going on around him. But all those things were still there when he was left, and nothing happened. The key was him, his attitude, his songs, his voice, his persona, his dedication. I think he would have happened without Blackwell, but I think it would have taken him 10 years longer. Or he might have been like Sparrow, somebody who's iconic in his world, but not internationally influential in the way that Marley is. So I probably missed a few things, but though that was the basic outlines. He had the goods. He had the distinctive voice. He had the catalog. He had the performance chops. He had the work ethic, and he did everything the business needed him to do relentlessly. Mm-hmm. And if you look at all the other people from Jamaica who didn't get that far, you'll find that they're missing in
at least one of those elements, or at least not up where Bob was.
Mm-hmm.
Or anything else. You can look at any other idiom. Why is BB King and everybody else is, collectors people.
Right.
BB King had the same ability to, the work ethic, the voice, the persona. With him, it was more the right manager than the right record company why he broke through. But that was another guy who did what needed to be done in terms of the business.
Right.
So if you look at anybody who gets that big, when at least at the point when they're getting big, they're doing everything that's needed for the business.
Right.
Jackson 5, they did, any of the Motown artists, Motown was all about doing what you needed for the business.
Right.
So anybody came through that school knew how to do it, even if they chose not to later.
Right.
That makes sense?
Yeah, great answer. So it's looking like we have we could go for like a little over 20 minutes. So I like to end all the I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, tell me what you want.
I was going to say I like to end the interviews with like a speed round of just some questions just to kind of get to know you a little bit more. So I got a couple different things I want to ask you. So first off, as far as non-reggae music goes, do you have 3 favorite albums?
One of them would have Dwayne Allman on it. That would be either Allman Brothers at Fillmore East or Layla. Let's see. Jazz-wise, my favorite things, I guess, the Coltrane album. And the other one would be, gosh, Al Green's Greatest Hits.
Cool. Great. How about
it's hard to limit to 3. I could do like,
you can keep going. Yeah, keep going if you want.
Okay, the Beatles albums, probably Revolver.
Oh,
yeah. Stones, Get Your Yayas Out or Let It Bleed, either one. Over, Under, Sideways, Down by the Yardbirds.
Oh, nice.
That was a textbook. Jeff's Boogie, I learned. That was the first song I really learned. BB King, Live at the Regal. Now that would have to be in the top 3. BB King, Live at the Regal. The Blues Breakers album with Eric Clapton, that's amazing. The other male album with Peter Green is amazing. Hard Road, that's really good. The Buffalo Springfield album is really good. I forget which one it is. One with Bluebird on it. Later stuff. Smoking at the Half Note, Wes Montgomery.
Oh God, yeah.
Well, any Wes really, but that one, that's my favorite. No Blues, and if you could see me now, like we're done. Gosh, Jamento with Monty Alexander, that's a wonderful record. Abyssinians, well, that's a reggae record. That first Abyssinians album, that's my favorite reggae album. Mahotella Queens, that from South Africa. That's one of my favorite groups ever. The 60s and 70s stuff is all great. Fela, Zombie. Guitar stuff. Roy Buchanan, but not on record. I used to go see him a lot. Second album, if you have to pick an album, that's the Roy Buchanan album. Albert King, Live Wire, Blues Power. Um, gosh, so many. Oh, first 3 Meters albums. Actually, first 5 Meters albums.
Nice.
Rejuvenation and Cabbage Alley and the three ones on Josie. James Brown, The Payback, that's a great record. War, All Day Music. The one after that is good. I think that's one's, gosh. The Louis Armstrong and Ella Fitzgerald stuff, all of that stuff is amazing.
So good.
The Charlie Parker, the Savoy recordings,
Yep.
the Charlie Christian stuff, that box set is really good. I'm looking at it now. A lot of the stuff I like is singles, like R&B singles. So greatest hits collections. Can't leave out MFSB. I have a four CD box set of MFSB. That's the Harold Melvin, the Blue Note stuff, and Stylistics. Those are great guitar studio textbook records. Some of them have 3 guitar players on them, and they're doing such minimal things, and it all works together.
Nice.
Those are big influences studio-wise, the OJ's records and those things. We were listening to that a lot and deconstructing it. I love George Benson. I can't really pick an album. It's Uptown is really good, the first one. A lot of the things that I liked best are people that I saw live a lot, like Shirley Scott. That was somebody who made a huge impression on me as a young musician. She used to come to Hartford every year and play the free concerts in the park, and I would not miss Shirley Scott. That was my girl. Hendrix, of course. Band of Gypsies. Maybe that should be one of the 3. That's got the best note ever played by a guitar player in the history of the universe. First note of the solo and Machine Gun.
Oh,
that's
the
crazy
best solo.
That's the best. Listen to it. That's the best note ever played on an electric guitar, in my opinion.
Haven't heard it in a while. I got to check that out.
It's all great, but the first note, you can't think of anybody else who's got a better note anywhere.
Check it out.
Pretty much any live Hendrix is good. Of the studio ones, Electric Ladyland, Axis is really good. First one he was kind of finding his way around, but Axis is really a strong record. Yeah, those are some good. I mean, I'm not putting enough jazz ones in there because I listen to it so much. Kind of Blue.
Oh, that's fine. I have jazz questions too, so don't worry.
Okay. All right. So
the next one is classical music. Do you have a couple of favorite classical pieces?
Bach and Mozart.
Okay.
I really like Bartók. Those are probably my 3 guys: Bach, Mozart, and Bartók.
Interesting. That's an interesting combination.
Any Bach, any Mozart. I don't like opera, and I even like Mozart's operas.
Wow. I'm not a huge opera guy either. I might have to check out Mozart. I love the music, but as soon as the singing comes in, it kind of...
Oh, God, thank you. My dad loved the Metropolitan Opera. Every Saturday afternoon while I was building things in his workshop, Metropolitan Opera, I wanted to die. I couldn't wait for the opera quiz at halftime. Couldn't wait for that. That was funny. The other stuff, as soon as they started singing, it's like, oh, Lord, get me out of here. Yeah, those... My dad really liked Charles Ives, so I'd put Charles Ives in there.
Yeah. Nice.
Okay.
How about do you have 3 favorite rock guitar players?
Hendrix, Dwayne Allman, and Jeez. Then it depends on the day.
Right, of course.
Um, but the third one, either Jeff Beck. I think he's the greatest one now by far. I don't think anybody comes close to him now living. Maybe put Jeff Beck third, and Eric Clapton, Peter Green, and Mick Taylor honorable mention.
Awesome. How about jazz guitar players? If you had three favorite jazz guys,
Wes and Wes and Wes.
no,
No, that's not fair. Wes, I really like what I've heard of Jimmy Rainey. I like Charlie Christian a lot. Yeah, Charlie Christian, Wes, George Benson is great. Maybe those three. Pat Martino is really good. Pat Martino will get my consumer dollar. A lot of the younger guys are really good. I like Ed Cherry a lot. I mean, he's not younger; he's my age, but he's probably my favorite guy playing around New York now.
Yeah, he's awesome.
That other guy, Pete McCann, is amazing. Yo Thomas, amazing. I play with him in Monty's group. Dan Wilson, he used to play with Joey DeFrancesco. And this other guy, Randy Napoleon, has a very interesting style, plays kind of with his index finger. Very, very unusual. He used to play with Freddie Cole for a long time. I'd say those four guys for the younger guys.
Didn't Freddie Cole just pass away?
Yeah, like last week, 2 weeks ago. Yeah, Randy played with him for years, about 10 years. Yeah, Randy and Dan and Yo Tom and Pete McCann and Ed Cherry are my favorite guys around New York now.
Nice. Cool. How about, all right, this might be a tough one, but I mean, you've traveled all over the world. Do you have a favorite place that you've traveled to?
So many of them have been amazing. I really like Switzerland. I liked Slovenia a lot. I didn't see much of it, but we were there for almost a week. I was very taken with it. I like Europe in general. I like Japan a lot. In America, I like New Orleans. I like Austin. I like San Francisco. I think I would like Detroit if I was there long enough to figure out how to get around. It was very, very tough. I guess it's still very tough, but it's also spread out. It's not a place that's easy to navigate if you don't have a car, don't know what you're doing. Chicago, I like a lot. I really like Chicago. I like Philadelphia. I like Boston. I like LA. I don't mind LA. Some people, I like it there. I like Seattle.
Was there ever a place that you went to that you were really excited and had really high expectations and then were disappointed when you got there?
You know, I don't think so.
That's good.
The places that I wasn't fond of, I was kind of going, all right, it's on the itinerary. Here we go.
Right.
No, I can't say. I would say in general, the gentrification trend has really screwed up some of my favorite cities. Oh, Paris. How could I leave off Paris? I love Paris. I like Marseille a lot too. Any big city in France. I love France. I would say that in general, gentrification has taken quite a bit out of London and San Francisco in particular. And those cities are not as compelling for me as they were even 10 years ago. I don't know if we can reverse that. It's just, you know,
Do you see the same thing happening with New York City?
Yes. Yeah. Um, yeah, I think this plague thing might actually reverse it. It's a hell of a way to get reverse gentrification, but you know,
Yeah, well, I'm hearing
I
a lot. I mean, I'm hearing some people that are moving out of New York City now because a lot of people are saying, they love living in New York for the opportunities and stuff, but now with this COVID thing going on, pretty much the opportunities are gone, and it makes pretty much just day-to-day living a lot more complicated. So I'm hearing like from friends like Greg just moved back to Danbury. Like I'm hearing a lot of people, at least for now, they're leaving New York
yeah,
and just waiting to see what's going to happen.
yeah, a bunch of my students have done that, and I understand it. The point of being here is the the community of musicians, and if you can't get together with your fellow musicians, why would you put up with it?
Right.
My personal situation is okay. I've been in the same apartment for 30 something years, so I'm okay, but I understand those who are struggling. It's really um, there isn't objectively a reason to stay here given the way things are, and I don't see them changing anytime soon. So that's a whole other topic, but the the issue for young musicians, I mean, why would you go to New York now? You graduate from Berkeley. Why would you come here? You know,
Right.
it makes sense for young people to go home and stay with their families now. It just makes sense. It just
Right.
makes sense. A lot of people we know are doing it. Uh, I hope things will reverse sooner rather than later and we can get back to being musicians again, but it's not clear when that's going to happen. And I don't know what to do until then. Except, I mean,
Right.
as I said, personally, I'm kind of okay, but between the teaching and home recording and my record, and a solvent spouse, like I'm kind of, my nut is minimal. I'm personally okay, but it took me 30 something years of being here to be okay.
Right. Yeah, it's weird. It's a weird feeling not having a gig in over like 4 months.
My last gig was March 14th. It's very strange.
Yeah.
I haven't plugged an electric guitar into an amplifier since March 14th. I either plug into my studio preamp or I play acoustically. And there's been no point in my career from 1971 when I first got paid for this to now where I have not played the electric guitar
Right.
through an amp. I hope I remember how.
Yeah, strange times. All right, I got two last questions, non-music questions, just for my own curiosity. Do you have a favorite movie? Or you name a few.
The harder they come. that I shouldn't have taken that long to come up with it. apart from them changing my entire life, I think it's a very good movie. I think that's great. I think the Talking Heads movie, Stop Making Sense, is a very good movie. As a movie, as a documentary. In terms of like fiction, what's the one where they say Rosebud at the end? Citizen Kane.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Uh, the classic Marx Brothers stuff, A Night at the Opera. That's amazing. Modern Times. I saw a lot of my parents were into old movies, so I saw a lot of them growing up. So that's probably what I've seen more of. And then in prep school, we had like the French New Wave stuff and Bergman and all that kind of thing. And I pretty much stopped going to movies after I came back from Jamaica. Money was an issue. Time was an issue. Headspace was probably the biggest issue. It just didn't seem like they got really expensive. When before I went to Jamaica, it was something a starving musician could do without thinking about it too much. When I came back, it was more involved.
Right.
Budgets got bigger. Somebody had to pay for it. I guess the ticket price people do. With I don't have any movie choices that anybody who had it's just not a field of expertise, I guess the way to put it.
Have you been watching movies during this whole coronavirus thing?
No, I've been obsessed with the political stuff.
Oh, wow. It's probably sounds stressful.
Yeah, it's not fun.
Yeah. It's addicting though. I know that feeling. Sometimes you just get sucked in and you start reading articles and before
I
you know
discovered
it,
Twitter during the crisis here, which was really, that's like
the
crack.
most toxic thing.
I don't post much, but I follow the threads avidly, and it's not good for me.
Yeah, Facebook and Twitter are just, I think, two of the most toxic things. But they, like you said, there is some sort of addictive quality to them as well.
Right. I've gotten Facebook under control. It took about 9 years. But,
but if Facebook wasn't so good for posting about gigs, I don't even think I would have a Facebook. You know, that's really the main reason I kept one going.
And it's also like, you know, a lot of my Jamaican friends are on it, so
right.
It's kind of easy to find out what's going on, and you know, you get work through it. Mm-hmm. And also with my discography, I get people finding out, oh, you played on that. That's my favorite record, or whatever, you know, or I had no idea you did this or whatever. And so it builds interest, you know. But
right.
Do you know Steve Hunter at all?
I don't think so.
Okay. Well, okay, we're talking about great rock guitar players. Steve Hunter is one of the top of my list. He did a record with Lou Reed called Rock and Roll Animal. If you haven't checked that out, just go check it out as soon as you can.
Lou Reed from the Velvet Underground?
Yeah. It's one of his first solo records. And Steve Hunter and Dick Wagner were two guitar players from the Detroit area. And Lou hired them to be his band. And the live recording is completely unedited. And it's something like the second gig or the first gig after 2 days of rehearsals. It's terrifying. Mm-hmm. It's the best 70s style rock guitar record I can think of.
Nice.
They're both great on it. But anyway, Steve is one of my heroes. And I got to meet him through the internet. When the internet came out, I discovered that he was there, and I discovered you could actually email your favorite guitar players and they would answer questions. So I emailed him, and we ended up meeting for lunch when I went out to LA. He was teaching at Musicians Institute then. And Steve has a serious vision problem. You know, he's legally blind, so he can't drive and do local gigs. He's either playing with Alice Cooper, or he's doing a major session, or he's doing nothing. He's got a funny career. You know, he's doing something that the whole world knows about, or he's home waiting for the phone to ring.
Right.
And we had an interesting talk about it. And he said, the best thing that's happened to my career, this is like 2004, I guess, when I met him in person. He said, the internet is the best thing that happened to my career, because there's all these people that knew me from the Lou Reed and the Alice Cooper records. And a lot of people in Europe thought I was dead because they just hadn't seen me doing anything.
Right.
And he said, now I get offers, you know, people write from France, will you play on my track, this kind of stuff. He says, the internet allows people to find out where you are. Mm-hmm. And that's the thing with social media, you know, and it evolves. Instagram now is important. 8 years ago, it wasn't that important. Now it's probably more important than Facebook. And there's this TikTok thing, which I intellectually understand, but can't figure out what I would do with. And it's part of the evolving world. And one of the things maybe to end with is that I'm 65. I started playing guitar when I was 13. I started playing music when I was 8. And a lot of people have professional careers that last the length of like a pro football career. You know, they're running backs, they set records. They blow their knee out, they're done. You know, there's a lot of guitar players who've been in a big band for 5 years and they never do anything else. Or if whatever they do doesn't work, you know? And I've never done anything like that, but I've managed to stay around for all this time. And part of the reason is that I get along with people and I do the work that's required. But a really important thing for any musician is to really work at not getting stuck in your era. Now, you're a younger guy. You're like Ted's age, right, basically?
Yeah, 29.
Yeah. It's not an issue for you yet. When you're 49, it's going to be an issue. Because what happens with people in music is the music that was important to you between the ages of, say, 10 and 20 is psychologically going to be the most important music to you for the rest of your life. It's going to resonate most with you because you were evolving and developing and forming allegiances and maturing as a person, and the music is the soundtrack for that. So that's always going to be your thing. What has happened to a lot of musicians my age is they can't get past the fact that their thing is not the way of the world anymore.
Right.
And they get angry and go, you know, the business stinks or whatever. And, you know, and people can't play and there's no good music. You know, they start railing at the state of the universe. And in my opinion, there's as much good music now as there ever was. The economic system that supported it has collapsed. Labor as a whole is devalued, not just musical labor, but labor of all human beings is devalued tremendously. And there are a lot of things going on that have nothing to do with music that are making our business very difficult. And if you're going to stick around, you're much better served by putting the energy into figuring out what's going on and where there might be a place for you in it than railing about why it isn't like like 2005 when if I had a great demo tape, I could get a record deal. You know,
Right.
Some major label would invest in me for 3 albums. You know, that those days are not coming back. But the fact of the matter is there are people making a living out of music. Some of them actually play musical instruments. You know, we're not making the money that people like whoever's running Spotify is making. But the point is that whatever is going on in the world, you need to figure out where you can fit in, where you'll be comfortable and have some kind of income stream. And that doesn't stay constant. You know, the model of doing like 250 bar gigs a year, which when I was coming up, people were doing, working 5 to 6 nights a week, playing bars and making much more money than they'd make in a factory job, or even like being an associate professor of philosophy, which is one of the things my mom wanted to do. I looked at what my friends were making in the bars and what that was paying, and I said, I can play the guitar and drink beer and meet girls. Why would I teach philosophy? Plus, there's more money. You know, that was a viable model then. The drinking age was 18. There were no other things competing with you except movies and TV. You couldn't go on the internet and go down a YouTube rabbit hole for 24 hours. You know, if you wanted to hear music, you had to go out and find it. And those days aren't coming back. And
Right.
I was lucky to have lived through them because I got a chance to play a lot at a young age and get a lot of gig chops happening. But now it's so much easier. You know, some of the young players coming up have access to all these videos and transcriptions and people who've actually codified what we were kind of figuring out by slowing the record player down to 16 RPM, you know?
Right.
There's a lot more resources now for people to develop themselves. So people like yourself, I mean, you would have been a guitar god in 1969 if you played the way you play now, given the way everybody else was playing.
Right.
But now you're one of many guitar players who plays really, 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 really well.
Mm-hmm. No, I appreciate it. And it's true. I mean, the thing you were saying too about how you want to figure out a way to kind of do what you enjoy in music and also have a steady stream of income. I feel like what's so interesting about what we're going through right now with Corona is it pretty much took the whole, steady income that people were getting from gigs and just took it out from, underneath them. And I can't even imagine what it must be like now, because I have a lot of friends that live in New York and they only rely on gigs for their income. Like they don't really teach at all. And I've always done both. So I can't even imagine what it must be like right now being a musician that's relying on gigs. There's nothing.
It's bad. I'm ahead of a lot of people because I have the reputation from the discography where people will ring me up and say, I'll send you a track, I'll pay you play on it. So I have some of that going on. It really came along last couple of years, and I do have money from the record coming in. And so I'm not entirely dependent on gigs. That being said, I think I did like 200 of them last year, or 150, some ridiculous number. I just did my taxes. I couldn't believe how long the spreadsheet was. And that was probably 65, 70% of my income.
Yeah.
And, the additional students and additional session work are not compensating for that. I'm taking a hit like everybody else.
Right.
I'm really worried about my friends because a lot of people I'm very close to are in the same boat.
Have they been doing like rent freezes in New York?
I don't know what they're doing. I honestly don't. I live in a rent-controlled building, so my nut is predictable, and for New York, quite reasonable. So I haven't had to pay much attention to it. I think that nationwide there should be rent freezes, both for individual people and for businesses. The small business guys are getting killed too, and that's where the gigs come from.
Right.
All these clubs, these little bars that have bands and stuff. My building is owned by Albanians, and a lot of them are right off the boat. They come and they live and they work for a while, and they get they buy a house in Jersey or Westchester. But there's this steady stream of them coming through the building, and the son of the super is a very nice guy, and they're all like, Europeans love music, so they're intrigued by the fact that they have a working musician in the building. And they don't know most of the people I play with, but they see me going in and out with the gear and stuff. And I've really been self-isolated because I'm in a lot of risk groups, and I'm taking this thing very seriously. And there's no work. Why should I leave, Right. So I actually got sick of my own cooking and ordered takeout a couple of weeks ago, and I was down in front of the building waiting for the car to come up with it. And the Supers kid is out there in front of the building, and he's one of these, I'm working 80 hours a week kind of guys. I have 3 jobs, and I'm saving up for this and that. And he's complaining because he's only got 1 job now. He's only got his regular 40-hour-a-week job now. The ones that, is 20 hour. His other 2 20-hour-a-week jobs are, they got knocked out. So he's hurting too. So I'm down there, and he goes, "Wow, I haven't seen you for a while. You're okay?" And I said, "Yeah, I've just been staying inside." I said, "Nobody wants musicians anymore." He looked at me and he said very seriously, "Everybody wants musicians. Nobody wants to go to bars."
Yeah.
And, it cheered me up. It was a nice thing for him to say, no, it's not you. It's not like people don't want what you do. It's that there's no place for you to do it.
Right.
So I see people, all kinds of famous musicians now are teaching. Chick Corea's got a course, George Benson's got a course.
Right.
All these guys are, doing these online courses. I bet they're great, but when you see those guys teaching, you go, well, I don't think they've just suddenly decided that they want to pass their knowledge on to the next generation while they're still here. Might be something else going on. So you're seeing all these people suddenly go online and teaching, and then doing these performances online, and tickets and passwords and stuff. And playing gigs, and everybody's 12 feet apart and stuff. And people are trying different stuff. I don't find any of it very compelling myself. My home video chops are worse than useless. I can barely aim the computer in the right direction to get my face on the camera. My friend Shay is a genius at it. She's got a cell phone and I think a stand of some sort, and she makes everything look like she's got a budget. And, I can't do that. I don't know where we go, but that's true with us as a society, not just for musicians. And we often get blinders on and think that the bad things are happening to us, like working conditions and stagnant wages and declining employment opportunities. We tend to rail at the music business. It's not just musicians who are feeling this. Right. Home health care aides are, their wages are really frozen. They've been frozen for decades. Right. They get a raise when the minimum wage goes up. As I said before, the devaluation of labor is a worldwide phenomenon. We are no exceptions just because we play music well. Right. And that's going to be a problem that society as a whole has to figure out how it's going to resolve. And we as working people have to take steps to make that change. And I don't see going online and doing a video of me playing giant steps from my living room is going to affect that very much, because that's still dependent on other people's discretionary income. And if their labor is being devalued along with yours, they don't have they have the same problem that we do. Right. And that's a problem with the business too, just the fact that people need 2 full-time jobs to survive in America. When I was a kid, that wasn't the case. Right. Mom could work. If you're middle class, mom stayed home and worked, took care of the kids, maybe worked part-time or did something at home that made money. But now we got 2 parents with 40-hour weeks, and sometimes somebody's doing a 3rd job on top of that and just barely keeping up. And that cuts down both on your discretionary income and your energy level to go out and see music or anything else. Right. These are all social conditions, and they're not set in stone, because I'm old enough to remember when it wasn't like that. Right. And everything's changing so rapidly now. It's tricky to know where this is going to be headed. But I'm hoping that when all is said and done, hopefully everybody comes back with a renewed sense of appreciation for everything, for seeing music, for having, in-person interactions, just everything that we're kind of being forced to go without. I'm hoping that it does some changes for the better, but, kind of remains to be seen. But hopefully that's the case. Well, my doctor is a very wise woman, says, Andy, don't worry about it. Everybody will forget. They'll all be back within a couple of weeks. And I said, why do you say that? She goes, why would anybody fly after 9/11? Mm-hmm. Everybody forgot. Everybody now just is used to taking their shoes off and getting scanned, and nobody thinks anything of it, because if you want to fly now, it's what you have to do. They forget. Right. So maybe what we have to do is the equivalent of flying now, for everyday life. Yeah, maybe. That's probably a good note to end on, though. But yeah, so if anybody's interested, Andy's got a great album from 2018 called The Harder They Strum, and I will put the links for everything in the description for social media, and if you want to check out the album. And thanks again for doing this. I really appreciate your time. You're just a wealth of knowledge. I just love hearing your stories and picking your brain about stuff, and hopefully we can do it again. Sounds good to me. I'd love to do it again. We didn't get past the 80s again. We did good this time, though. We got there. Maybe we'll do a part 2. We'll do a part 2, because I did a lot. There is a lot of other stuff I do want to ask you too. We'll do a part 2 if you're okay with that. That sounds like a plan. But it'll just be answering questions. That sounds great. All right. Thanks again, Andy. I appreciate it. All right. Take care. Bye.